it always ends up being that way, when we do an episode or something, and you're like, oh, we forgot this, we didn't cover that. Then you listen back, like, oh, it's better than I thought. That's the rule of
Yeah,
thumb for podcasting, from what I've experienced. You always think of like,
yeah,
oh, I did the thing you didn't say, but it's all, it's real time conversation. You're like, oh, I did say that. I said that. Okay, yeah, I agree with
yeah,
it. You
yeah.
know.
Yeah. I was surprised. I think we did better than I thought.
We're getting
But
better at each pass here.
well, I'm not sure about that, Andrew.
Yeah.
Heavy.
Bored.
Heavy.
I am heavy, heavy, heavy.
Bored.
I may say that the male is entirely hostile. No! Inner
Resources.
life, friends, is boring. We must not say so.
Yeah, so we're on to Ararat, um, which is the collection before the Wild Iris, your favorite collection. So that's one, two, three, four, five. This is her fifth collection.
Fifth collection.
That's
And
a yeah.
I was going to ask you about, I mean, this is maybe her darkest collection. I
Oh, that's
mean,
interesting. Why'd you say that?
I mean, reading through it, I
Yeah.
was, uh, I would say it's also her most confessional too, in terms of a certain, it's so much death. So much death is in this
There
thing.
is a death.
Yeah.
There's death in every poem, and
And yeah, I
it's
was just
the
like, this is a dark fucking book. This is a dark book. Uh,
well, I find it. I mean, there's a lot of scene setting, which is very unusual for Glick. She actually gives you the information for the first time that the previous four collections have been built on, but she hasn't really been telling you what's been going on, quite what the state of her family, her blood family. Do you call it a blood family in America? Is that how you refer to
I mean,
your
not quite. I guess people would say bloodline more than blood family,
bloodline family?
or not
I mean, I
even
mean,
like,
I mean, when you're talking to, friends, and you say, "Oh, my family," and so how do you distinguish between, your um your wife and your daughter and your family growing up?
yeah, I mean, I guess we would just say, if we did use that phrase, I guess we would say blood relative is the one I hear.
That
But
sounds a bit
even
sort of clinical, doesn't it, somehow?
yeah, I mean, there's then again, I don't know it. I mean, I guess there might be regional things too across the country here of how people refer to it. But for things like that, we would just say in-laws or family through marriage or aunt through marriage or something to specify that we're not like blood related. But then, you know,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah,
uh, nothing
yeah.
too
I've sort of
specific.
I've sort of trained myself to say blood family when I'm referring to my parents and sibs. So and my family um to refer to my wife and three sons. So it's to me there's a distinction, but it has been a deliberate choice, I think, by me. And there's a lot of talking about, I don't know what the divorce rate is in America, but it's like I think it's like 50%
Yeah, it's
in this
around
country.
there. Yeah.
Yeah. And then
It's
did you know the divorce rate for second marriages is 70% or even higher?
that makes sense. Yeah.
Not to me.
I mean,
Yeah,
it's
and
interesting. It's
yeah,
interesting that how that plays out culturally, and as you say, even across continents. Now we're talking cross culturally, and again, there's some similarities, right? Like American culture was birthed from British culture, and then like
yeah, yeah,
but it's been a couple hundred years, so there's differences, but yeah. I mean, I think it is something about the way we just I don't know. I don't know. Just the
Well, I mean,
way.
now we talk about extended families,
Yes, yeah.
because which is a kind of an easier. It sort of trips off the tongue a little bit easier, does it more easily, doesn't it? An extended family. But anyway, the reason we're talking about this is because if you're interested in families, then I think you're going to be interested in this collection. I think it's her most family orientated. Um, it's a sort of lodestone of um, little nuggets of information about her childhood.
Yeah, and you bringing that up, when I was reading through this for, taking notes, preparing for this episode, I was thinking to myself, this is basically her like life studies. This is
Mm.
her version of that. It feels that way, and you kind of get those little like, yeah, it's not even as detailed as something like life studies, where Lowell goes into his, great great grandfather who was an admiral in the British Navy, and like they came over and the Boston Brahmin stuff, like all of these things.
Doesn't feel very
Uh,
real, that though, does he? When he starts going
right,
on about that, you think,
right, yeah.
it's like he's
And it's
writing stuff from
usually
a
kind of
painting or
boring.
something.
Yeah, it's kind of
Yeah,
boring. Like when
I
you're just
never
getting
really got that.
facts about his
Yeah,
rank in the Navy and stuff and blah blah
yeah.
blah. It's just not quite.
I mean, I love Skunk Hour from that
Oh yes, yes.
collection, and the sort of what was the blue poem about him being in psychiatric hospital,
Oh
wasn't it?
right, right, right. Yes.
Yeah, that's one of my first collections I ever bought, but I think I was a bit disappointed with it, really. I mean, apart from those two standout poems, I sort of didn't really want to read about his great great grandfather particularly.
Yeah.
If it's called Life Studies, you know, I mean, I didn't really, I mean, it's such a famous book, and it's supposed to have started off this whole confessional poetry.
You might, I mean,
Uh,
Lowell's stuff, even before he went to the confessional stuff, I mean, have you read any of the, Quaker Graveyard in Nantucket and kind of,
yeah, we talked about that. Do you
yeah,
remember?
oh, right, right, right. Yes, yes, yes. I
Yeah. We
like
talked
that
about that.
stuff better than his life studies stuff. Yeah, it's just, and again, it's very embellished. It's very complex. It's difficult. Like he writes, his first few books are hard books. Like he spent a lot of time writing, and you can tell the difference when you're reading through something like life. There's just a richness to a book that is, I don't know, labored over in that kind of technical way versus labored over in this kind of family details that, maybe his
Yeah,
most
but I
of us
mean,
aren't that interested in,
a bit of a spoiler from some of my
No, please.
conclusions,
Yeah.
but I did write that, it's almost commonplace, isn't it now? These kind of poems about families and about mothers and fathers and childhoods. And I wonder if Glick is responsible for a lot of that, making it commonplace. Because I mean, every single poem in this, unlike life studies, for example, it's like,
Right.
you know, every single poem in this collection is embedded in her childhood. That's certainly not the case in life studies. So she's sort of generated this whole, I don't know, what do you want to call it? Genre? I don't know. Um, and now we take it for granted, and it's gone all, it's the diaspora of these incredible, you know,
Yeah.
poems has exploded into the 20th century. And maybe the source of that, one of the sources of that is this collection.
Yeah, especially when I don't know, I'm thinking of like Plath's daddy and stuff like that. There was a thing, and it was because of the confessional greats that came that were doing this kind of family. Uh, it's interesting with how it plays out here between the male writers and the female writers. And again, listeners, I don't want to overemphasize that. It's slight. There's slight differences. They're not
It's
huge differences, but
No,
uh,
I would say it's huge differences.
yeah, yeah. I mean, in some cases, well,
I mean, for
the
example,
way that they
yeah,
write about their father, the way that they write about their father, Plath was not as tender about that kind of thing, and I think even something like Glick's collection here, when she's writing about her father, is not very tender. But
yeah,
then,
but I
of
mean, you
course, with
take what
Glick, it's complicated because Glick does that kind of subtle tenderness in all this darkness in a certain way. But Uh,
Yeah, you're back to that word again, Andrew.
she's very
It's,
good at it. She's very good at making that
tenderness. I
subtle.
don't know. Is it tenderness?
Well, I would say this book is not as tender as some of the stuff I was seeing in the first four books, but maybe it's because of the mood I was in. Maybe it's because my wife and I we are expecting our second child here
Are you? Oh,
in a
well
couple
done.
months.
Great.
Yeah,
Oh, brilliant. Okay.
first boy. Yeah, so
Oh
we're
no, boy.
gonna have a
Wow.
little son.
Okay, fantastic.
Uh,
Well
so
done.
maybe it was
That's really
that
good.
I just kept getting darkness from this. I was like, oh, this is dark as shit. Like, this is really
Yeah, I
dark.
mean, this is
She
this is
hates
a
her son. She hates being a mother. She
yeah. I
hates her
mean, this is a
sister. Like,
there's absolutely no doubt this is a tough book for you, Andrew, as a father of, very young children. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And I should think you've probably got a feeling of dread with most of the poems that you read, really. Well, should we just call it a day now?
Well, right. I mean, and here we are back again. We're another episode of Heavy Board, listeners, and we are continuing our series of Louise Glück, the same book where we're doing her poems from 1962 to 2012, and we are joined again by poet, writer, friend of the pod, Damon Moore is back with us.
Hi,
Uh,
hi, thanks, Andrew.
of course, great to have you with us, Damon. Uh, and we're discussing her fifth book now, the Ararat.
Yeah,
Uh, and as we get into it, I guess let's just hop in, Damon. We've already been talking, but this, of course, I want to mention the quote in the beginning. Uh,
yeah. I always
Plato.
underestimate that. What's she saying this time? Is it who's she dedicated it to?
It's one of those things where, so the quote that starts the book is it's a from Plato quote, and it's very brief, but it just says, "Human nature was originally one, and we were a whole, and the desire and pursuit of the whole is called love."
Yeah, yeah. So that kind of so she's so that would be applicable to bearing Homer Simpson in mind. He said, "What's that Homer Simpson question?" Smile and everybody will think we're a normal family. It's that's how a family life maybe ought to be, sort of bound together in love, and no one would know any differently. Is that how you would interpret that? Is that a quote for someone else or?
Yeah, it's from I didn't look it up this where it's from Plato, but it was this I took it as yes, the desire and pursuit of the whole is called love. So again, this feeling of wholeness, right? This feeling of completeness that a lot of us get out of family life or love or marriage or something like that. Uh, but then I after finishing the book, and going back and looking at this quote, it feels like it's almost desperate to find a little bit of what they would call, the pursuit of the whole is called love. It seems like maybe these poems or what Glick was trying to go for is trying to show the darkness in the love, maybe. That's being generous because I'm not sure that it works uh, that way, but I don't
No, I
know.
think I think there is a way of getting you to a slightly better place, actually, Andrew. Although I do, you know, there are there are some tough points in here, but there is also some driving ideas underneath it, which which they kind of just they kind of distract. I mean, she's definitely stepped down, hasn't she, from the triumph of Achilles?
Yeah,
She left behind all that bathos, sex and violence, proto mythologizing, confusing personas. I mean, she's she's left that, and something that you said at the end of that pod has really helped me with that collection, which was when you said that poets are allowed to be confused, or they can be confused. And
right.
that's a new idea for me. I've always
They're just
I've
human, yeah,
well I've always thought that poets knew what they were doing.
Right.
So the idea of a confused poet, even somebody like Baudelaire, for example, who was,
Yeah. He's a
I
good
mean,
example of it. Yeah, yeah.
well, yeah, he was sort of, you know, very, oh God, I don't know, hyperactive in the in the hyperactive in let's
I
sort of
got
hit out at let's hit out at everything. Oh, right, there it is,
right
Eau
next
de
to
Mal. But yeah, it's he I wouldn't describe him as confused. I mean, he knew what he wanted to say.
Right.
Yeah, he, which was, and that little collection of desperate poems, changed the course of the of Romanticism. So it's very, very influential. I don't think he was confused. He knew what he was doing. So, I mean, I haven't been trying to think of a confused poet um, that I could put in the same sort of, experience as I had when I read The Triumph of Achilles. But
It's, I often, since you're bringing it up, I often wonder when we think about poetry, and this isn't something I've written about or something, just loosely thought about in terms of, being full of contradictions, like the way that we process information, most human beings, most of us, if we're not autistic or something, process the narrative, right? We need to have the narrative. So a lot of times when we go to interpret poetry, if there isn't that, or we can't project that, I don't know, that can maybe get it come somewhat confusing, or it's just hard to maybe it's hard to recognize a poem that doesn't work or something because of that. Or we try to like, we talk about even with Glick kind of being confused or her kind of standoffishness. I don't know. Maybe we're trying to force a narrative just to make it make more sense to us, as we're trying to read through the collection.
no,
Whereas,
I think The Triumph of Achilles is a collection of a deeply confused psyche.
right,
And it was you identifying that really did help me. And just as a little
uh,
digression,
we like
I
hearing
looked
that
into
on the podcast, Damon. Yeah, so that you hear that, listeners. Yeah, that's why we listen. That's why
um,
we do it.
just as a little digression, I um I came across this review by um James McCorkle and about the Triumph of Achilles, and he starts off by saying some pretty standard things. So he sort of says Glick creates drama through the urgency of an implicit and revelatory dialogue with the reader. I mean, you could imagine a lecturer saying that, couldn't you, to a sort of auditorium
Right.
of college students? And and then he says the patriarchal power of objectification and control, particularly of sexuality, is assumed by the women poets. Well, I think that's a bit more risky. But I mean that both of those two things they're sort of fairly standard, I think. But then he says, talking about this connection, he says the poet realizes that the power, that which can kill, negates the possibility of reflection and questioning, which is the reversal of the conditions of dominance. And I thought, whoa, off we go. You
Yeah.
know, um, that's much more interesting. She says the process of her investigation into the themes of the triumph and of Achilles is actually countermanding her dominance, and they become dominant, not her. And then he said, there is a refusal of any rapture with language, the world, or the body. Well, that fits, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because of the sort of directness of the language of that poetry in that collection. Indeed, each of these elements has been distilled into an abstraction. Yeah, I'd agree with that. Ironically, only the poet's voice conveys a sense of its own history and narrative, and that is a particular voice forced into desolation and obsession. Ooh, so yes, I think that does, that brings it all. That is a sort of Encyclopedia Britannica definition of how the origins of confusion, isn't it? And some of the, so I was, so yeah, that all. So I think she knew what she was driving at, or more or less, but I don't think that she was in control of the poems necessarily.
That's
You
interesting.
know.
Yeah. Yeah. They kind of take on a life of their own. I noticed
Mm,
this more with free writing stuff where you just let the raw subconscious kind of fill in,
mm,
and that can happen. I think some artists can become too reliant on that. But it
mm,
is interesting because that's where you get a lot of interesting turns or a lot of conflicting things that are maybe confusing or maybe don't quite fit together. But
mm,
somehow the poem and the writer, the mood they were in, whatever it is, just somehow manages to weave it. I mean, that's the skill, right? Is to weave these things that maybe don't make sense together and make them beautiful or, ugly, whatever the goal is of you're trying to do here. Most people are trying to make it beautiful, but like yeah, I just there is some level to that
or
to
just, or
writing
yeah, or
poetry, art in
yeah,
general. Yeah.
or just leave it sort of
Yeah.
post-traumatic
Right.
as it is, as a statement.
This is the
Um,
my controversial take on this is what David Lynch does, and this is why I don't like David Lynch. Kind
right.
of it's kind of always unfinished, it feels to me, whenever I would see any of his projects, and I know there's many listeners to this that would disagree with me on that, but it's just a lot of that. Those films, when you watch them, are just there's cool ideas, there's some great stuff, there's some really weird, awesome things in it, very artistic, but then it always kind of falls apart for me. And I feel like if I had to put my finger on it, I would say it was something like that. It was because of a kind of unfiltered, raw subconscious that people confuse as like, because it is such a part of creating art, but people confuse it as like that's the end product too. Mm,
Well, it's kind of it's stylized to death, isn't it? So
right,
you've got this, you've got all these tropes of how people think that they ought to behave
right.
because of the position that they're in, and all of their effort goes into the mask, really, and and you're not really left with why they're there, other than the fact that they're just participating in this life studies,
Yeah,
which doesn't really have a clear a clear sort of trajectory,
yeah.
really.
And not that it
Yeah, no,
has to, right? Like it could do something completely off the wall and not have a clear narrative or trajectory from start to finish. That's interesting. But then I'm always like, you usually have to give us something else. This is why, again, people that are going to yell at me about this. So I say Blue Velvet is Lynch's masterpiece. It's the one that works all the way through, and it seems like a complete, coherent thing. Uh, Even though it doesn't quite have much of a, same thing, it doesn't have quite a much of a plot or a narrative to follow, but it works somehow. It was that kind of all comes together in this weird way.
it could
Um,
be it could be a bit like the painter Bonnard, who said that you need two lives,
right.
one life to look and another life to paint paintings.
Maybe
And it
maybe
could,
that's the divorce thing we were talking about too. Yeah, maybe
yeah,
that you need two lives. Yeah.
yeah, it could be that if David Lynch was given another life, he could come back and he can make some really seriously great films.
Yeah. No.
You know, you
Although
know.
many would argue he did anyway. Yeah, but I wouldn't. But
Yeah, but it was about. Do you remember that poem about liberation from the tribes of Achilles, where I was saying my interpretation of that poem was it was about writer's block, but in the way that you to familiarize yourself with Glick's technique, you could also apply this to that poem, which is that it is Glick herself who just tears things apart. She talks about the huntress. Um, that I've got a quote here, I think. That part of me that was the victim, only victims have a destiny, and the hunter who believed, whatever struggles, begs to be torn apart. That part is paralyzed. So she's talking about trauma and um, uh, Kafka's image of breaking the ice of a person's personality and raw emotional state with an ice pick. He describes that, and she's saying that she's got to tear things apart. She's got to tear this stuff apart, And then later on in the poem, it says, that creature who could not decide whether to flee or be still, and so was trapped in the pursuer's eyes. So she in that, she is both the hunter and the victim. She both hunts this trauma. She's out there looking for it in this collection, Ararat. She's out there looking for this trauma, looking for how it came about, but she's also trapped. She's also trapped and torn apart by it, both hunter and victim. So
Yeah.
that's another interpretation of that poem, which often when you read her poems, you think, yeah, okay, I think I've got that. And then you think, yeah, but I've just got one plane of that. I think there's something else. There's
Yeah.
something else happening there.
And you know what
Yeah.
what struck me most about going into this collection too was it was a couple poems and I marked down in here as we get into the poems how
Yeah.
where I felt it the most. But it was about halfway through, give or take, where I started seeing, I was like, man, are these all the same poem over and over again? It almost felt like that. And it was also it felt like her least refined. Like it
Yeah.
was just raw kind of grief and darkness and like kind of it's, at least for Glick, it's not raw like you would see some of these writers that would be considered, unrefined or something, like a Bukowski or something, just like a raw kind of unrefined
Charles
carelessness,
Bukowski,
maybe. Yeah.
Charles Bukowski and Louise Glück giving a poetry reading at the same time. That would be,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Interesting that they were writing at the same time. Yeah. And
I
one
mean,
was getting Pulitzers and one wasn't. Yeah. That's for
yeah,
sure. But
exactly. Yeah. I
yeah.
don't think Bukowski was getting any Pulitzers, but
Yeah.
this it is regarded as uh, a book about sorrow, as you said, a book about death, a mournful book. Um, the critic Dwight Garner called it the most brutal and sorrow-filled book of American poetry published in the last 25 years, and it was published in 1990.
Yeah. There is a brutality to this. I wonder if we when we get into some poems, if we think of what we could pinpoint any of that brutality and
I think there's
I
a
didn't,
lot.
yeah, I
Uh,
didn't want to say almost cruelty.
she's horrible about her mother. I can't
Her
bear the way
mother,
she
I
talks
think,
about her mother.
and her father too. And there's a little self-deprecation in this way she talks about her father in the book. Again, if we're taking what she says to be kind of confessional, which I think this book really, compared to all of her other ones, this maybe is the most confessional one. And maybe it was just like her time in her life where she felt like just doing that and pursuing some, maybe, everyone can have, she had a bunch of other books. She got the prize for the last one, so she could basically do anything, right? That ultimate freedom that comes with winning a big prize and being established in the institutional side of things. Gives you a lot of freedom as an artist, to suddenly be like, I can do whatever I want. And sometimes that can be really interesting. Sometimes it can just be
Yeah,
like, maybe you should have a little more restriction on it. Like,
but it
that,
doesn't. It doesn't follow through because when we did the Triumph of Achilles, and I worked out that I put forward um my conclusions that Achilles represented her father um to Glick, and on a preliminary reading of Ararat, which I'd done at that stage, uh, I was expecting Ararat, this collection, to be mostly about her father. And she just drops the idea. I think there are about three poems about her father. She just drops it. So
right,
she's put all of that work, all of that psychic effort into transmogrifying her father, Achilles, to her father and her father to Achilles. And then she just says, we're not doing that anymore.
right.
We're going to leave that. I've done that. I thought, what? I mean, sometimes this poet can really,
Yeah.
you just want to sit down and you just want to ask her a few basic questions, you know, like
And
like that,
this
like that.
collection
Why
was
go
just
through all that effort and then not followed up?
yeah, I mean, I guess we could speculate endlessly about what was going through her. For me, for this book in particular, it just felt like at a certain point, about halfway through, I think it was about page 220 in this version of it. This is a short book. Listen, this is like a 40 page collection of poetry, no sections, which I enjoyed, and stuff. But just I don't know, it just felt like everything that she had to say had already been said by the time you're halfway through. and then it just kind of gets redundant. And you're like, oh, another poem about,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
grieving her sister, or another poem about her mother and father's relationship, where
Well,
she's kind of,
I'll try and guide
uh,
you through it a little bit,
yeah, yeah,
Andy.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
We'll see
Yeah,
how
so
if that holds.
there is a form to it of some kind, but I think we ought to start with the title.
Yes.
So, is this collection misnamed, do you think?
Hmm. I thought about that because I was like, all right, I don't know anything about this collection. I'd never read it before, and I'd only read Glick's big books previous to this. The type of stuff you get when you're studying this in college. You're not reading everything by her, but you're getting a couple of the big important books. So this is one that I've never read before we started doing this. So I was like, okay, the title, I don't know anything about it. I got to look it up. So I started looking it up. The Ararat Valley in Armenia, Mount Ararat in Turkey, which borders Armenia. These are considered huge biblical things. Um, they're referenced in the Bible. Like the big thing is that Mount Ararat in Turkey, present day Turkey, is supposedly, right, it's written in the Bible, the landing site of Noah's Ark after the Great Flood.
Hmm.
And so it was named for that, and the actual meaning of the word Ararat equals, sacred land or high land. And we
Mm.
could do that in terms of a couple different ways, right? We could interpret that. Uh, but that's where
Yeah.
I was okay, so that makes a little bit more sense considering the sacred land, I think, makes more sense than the highland, although Glick doesn't shy away from using both, I think. And again, there's really only
Okay.
one poem that refers to the Mount, and it's basically an elegy for her sister. Um,
So, do you think it's misnamed,
uh,
this collection? I mean, what do you think that's got to do with the main, the driving themes coming out of this collection?
well, I mean, for me, I would say I would say no, it's not misnamed, only because I think what she was going for, at least what I can assume she was going for in this, is kind of immortalizing her family in a way. Like, while it's dark, and redundant, and not quite as refined as we're used to seeing from Glick, there
Mm.
is that same kind of raw energy that we talked about in her very first collection. Just
Yeah.
there's something about her style that really
Yeah.
draws you in. But I think the overall,
Yeah.
it almost feels like it's not an obituary, but some type of eulogy, or at a funeral, there's a funeral type to this, like this kind of burial rituals, or this kind of grieving rituals around burials. So I guess I'm doing a little stretching around there to get it to fit. But yeah, I don't know. What do you think, Damon? Do you think it's
Well, if we
properly titled, or
if we apply a little bit of symbolism to this, I
please?
think
Yeah.
um you've got her little grey house, haven't you, in House on Marshland, and pops up again in this collection. And this little grey house, it's like an ark, isn't it? And it's sitting there on the salt marshes of Long Island, and there's Noah with his ark, and inside the ark are his family, um, his three sons, their wives. Doesn't mention anything about children, as far as I can tell. Um, and from this group, God is going to start again, or Yahweh in the Judaic tradition. So we're going to look a little bit, I think, at Glick's Jewish heritage, which we haven't done.
Hmm. Again,
And
the Armenian connection, yeah, with
yeah,
yeah.
and as you would say, shout out to any rabbis listening because, you know, this is intense stuff for the Judaic religion. So you've got these three titanic figures, uh, Noah, Abraham, and Moses. And I will make an appearance in this collection, although Abraham only just peeps in, and I might have sort of not quite got that right. Noah's the most ancient. His story goes back to the Middle Bronze period of ancient Greece, so it's like 3,000 to 4,000 years ago.
Right.
And it's an incredibly important story, because it's the first covenant that God or Yahweh makes with his people. And his people are the Israelites,
Yeah.
or they will later become the Israelites. I mean, at this stage, they're not Israelites. They're sort of tribes of Canaan, I suppose, after Abraham. But God has decided that he's had enough of the evil behavior of human beings, his creation. I mean, if you think back to Lamentations, do you remember?
Yeah.
God with his golden eye, and he's flowers are springing up and beautiful creation is springing up, and then he's got these two, this human being he's created, these two human beings he's created, and they're just causing trouble. They're causing problems because they have asked for the one thing that he doesn't want to give them. He doesn't think which is control over their own souls.
Yeah.
Why can't human beings just be like, just behave like all these other beautiful creations that he's creating, like, butterflies or
Right.
rabbits or um, or sort of beautiful flowers. Why can't they do? But no, they just don't. They're difficult. They're awkward. They start asking questions, and God gets fed up with them, and he leaps off, because that's not what God does. He doesn't. God creates. He doesn't hang around to sort out our problems. That's not how he kind of saw it. That's not what he's doing necessarily. I mean, in the Christian tradition, he
Right.
is, or she is, but it's very different in 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 the Jewish religion.
Yes, much more vengeful God in the Jewish
Yeah,
tradition
so
of
you've got this little grey house. Okay, it's filled with Glick's family, a little family, because there's only four of them. Um, I mean, I think the grandparents come to visit and a few aunts every now and again. Um, and what happens to the flood? Well, you should never underestimate Glick's water phobia. So a flood that's like brilliant for her.
right.
But all that phobic water coming out of the earth. Um, she she kind of loves all that. So I started thinking about this, and do you remember in the Triumph of Achilles, the poem, The Triumph of Achilles, right at the end, she makes a reference which thought I said to you was rather trite, which was she conflates Achilles' great weakness, his heel, which is the only vulnerable part of his body, uh, with his capacity for love. And I thought that was but then I thought, it makes sense to her, you know, doesn't really, probably most other people. So I thought maybe this collection is named after her son, who was called Noah.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah. And I think it is, because
Yeah.
she's written a couple of hard poems about her son, which if I was a son of a mother like that, I wouldn't necessarily want to read those poems.
Yeah, I agree. That's what I was thinking when I was reading a lot of this. It's like, my God, to put
Yeah.
this out publicly about what you're feeling.
So I think this is her way of compensating.
Yeah.
And I think that's why she's called the poem Ararat. That, and for the collection Ararat, that, and for the reason that she sees her family as an ark. They're
Mm.
all they're all separated out for different reasons. Um, but that's where they all are. So it's like Noah's in there, all of the other family members are in there, and I think that's why the collection's called Ararat. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
And
I
when
think
you think
that's
about
why.
it too, it's referencing the ending of the Noah's Ark story. Well,
Yeah,
at least, the big flood, at least there's more to it after that. But it just, there's, when they come out and rejuvenate the earth, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. But, it is like the ending of like, this is the beacon of light after the dangerous, scary flood. You land on this beautiful mount, in the Middle East out there. And, it's
yeah,
the birds are chirping and you're kind of sitting there, it's finally settled. There's like a little bit of relief. Maybe she's referring to the moment after grief, maybe.
yeah.
And I
So
think
yeah.
maybe that's where it will fit in
Well,
here.
I don't know if they were grieving for the loss of all these sort of badly behaved human beings, but
I haven't
um,
read those. I want to revisit, especially with my children, to revisit a lot of these Bible stories, these kind of classic stories that are uh, but the Noah's Ark one is one of my favorites. Yeah, it's one of my favorite kind of
yeah, it's
biblical.
got a
Yeah,
nice narrative arc, isn't it? Sort of God loses his temper, he's had enough. He finds the most righteous person that he can. He decides to save him and destroy everybody else. But then he has this moment of regret when the waters recede. Suddenly, God turns from a warmonger to a peacemonger,
right,
and it doesn't say in the Bible why that happens, but God then reflects and promises Noah that he'll never do anything like this again. That's
right.
and that is the first covenant, and the sign of the covenant is a rainbow. So whenever you see a rainbow in the sky, Andrew, you can think of
Right.
well, if you're, probably actually devotees to the Jewish religion, whenever they see a rainbow, they probably do think about Noah and you know and the Ark of the Covenant.
Yeah, and
Um,
those I mean, and those are the great stories. The Noah's Ark and the Moses parting the sea, and
yep,
yeah. And I'm not crazy about the Abraham stories, but those are still, interesting stuff where, yeah, the sacrificing of the children, this kind of
exactly.
thing, like, yeah, the kind of birth of the religious of the three huge religions in the world.
Yeah,
So it is just so, I mean, it's just great little stories if you think of it from a secular point of view. But I think, it's always interesting too, and I've been more interested in this as I've aged and stuff. I would consider myself atheist. That's what I would call myself publicly. I was raised Catholic and all of this sort of things, so I'm very familiar with that part of the church. But
mm,
I don't know, there's always this kind of when you're trying to be more secular about a religious story,
mm,
you can't quite do it, right? Like there's always a little bit of that religious, what would we call it? That religious something that's just in the back, right? Of like, and I think Glick captures that in a way where she kind of rejects this thing, and maybe a more atheistic style of, it was the time for that. Most intellectuals were calling themselves atheists, from, the 30s into, present day, right? Basically, is when that was becoming acceptable for academics and scholars and writers to start saying things like that publicly. But there's
yeah,
always just that little bit of like, you know, you can't quite get
yeah.
away from the symbolism of it. You can't quite get away from what it represents.
Well,
That's part of history. Yeah.
the strength of these stories is phenomenally powerful. And
Right.
when you start looking at the differences between Christianity and the Judaic religion, it's really quite hard. I find it quite difficult to absorb
Right.
because, you know, I mean, you could describe Christianity, not to say that I would. I suppose my parents were non-practicing Catholics, but you could describe it as a form of capitalism, couldn't you? Because it's sort
Right.
of, invest early and then you get a big reward at the end, big payout at the end. But
Have you
the
I don't think it's his theory. Peter Thiel has said this. I think it's Rene Girard's theory, the philosopher,
right.
uh, where he says that you cannot interpret the Old Testament without the new now. Like in terms of that, like once the New Testament was created, it now has forever put a lens over the Old Testament. I don't know, just an interesting way to interpret the kind of
No,
yeah,
I would say uh he's either misleading himself or he's misleading us. I mean, they are very, very different.
right. Yeah, they're
There is
completely
very
different.
little
Yeah,
there is very little belief in an afterlife. um, in Jewish religion.
Right.
They don't believe that Jesus, a Jew doesn't believe that Jesus is the Messiah. They don't even think that King David, the return of King David, there's going to be a return of a messianic figure. It's very sort of present,
Yeah.
I would say, their religion. It's all to do with our relationship with God right now, and that includes good and evil. They have a very interesting perspective on good and evil. They're much more abstract,
Hmm.
um, in a way, but also it's also very clear the directives that God has given. So he says, you're not going to do this, you're not going to do that. So in Genesis it says, whoever sheds human blood, by humans shall their blood be shed.
Right.
For in the image of God, God has made mankind, and for you be fruitful and increase in number, multiply on the earth and increase upon it. So there's very strong strictures as to what you can and cannot do, but they're not brushing over. The Jewish faith doesn't brush over this problem of suffering, and good and evil, which is the stone in the shoe of every religion. Perhaps you could ask your philosopher, about that.
Right.
Be interesting what he says about that. Um, and so it's a very different treatment. And do you remember when you said at the beginning you read out those quotes about good and evil, didn't you? At the beginning of the triumphs of Achilles, and I hadn't really taken them on board at all. I mean, I just ignored
So
the
sometimes that's best for the first couple reads, and then you can go
yeah,
back and start to see how it
yeah.
fits or how it changed after you read it a few times. Yeah.
So then I thought, okay, maybe there's maybe there's something in those religious poems in the Triumph of Achilles, and there's one in Ararat that's actually talking to this problem of good and evil. Now, the problem of good and evil, as far as I understand it, again, please ring in if you're a rabbi, but the the problem of good and evil, as far as I understand it, in the Jewish tradition, is that God has given us free choice, and good and so you can choose to be good and you can choose to be evil. You can choose to be good and become closer to God, or you can do evil deeds and become separated from God, which is like that's awful. You don't want to do that. Don't want to get
Right.
separated from God. But the issue is down to us and our relationship with God. Do we want to become closer to God, or do we want to become separated from God? The two things are locked together, but they're also quite nebulous, because I think you go through your life and not feel particularly, connected to
Right.
God, even if you live a good life. I mean, this is a debating point for,
Right. Yeah.
a synagogue, I suppose. Can you live a good life and then at the end of that life feel close to God?
Right.
Like like a monk. There was as a sort of anecdote about a monk, I think, uh, and they asked him. They said, how do you know that you've lived a good life, or how do you know that you've lived a rewarding life? And he said, if I can dig my own grave in the ground of this monastery and be buried in this monastery, I will know that I've lived a good life. So it's like there is a sort of, but I just don't, I mean,
Yeah.
you can't say you're an atheist in this country. I mean, I used to say I was an atheist sometimes at dinner parties. You cause havoc. So, we're a nation of agnostics. That's what we are.
I guess ever since Henry VIII, right? You guys had a little
Yeah,
confusing
yeah,
relationship with
yeah, yeah.
churches
That's
and
what we
stuff.
are.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's socially agnostic.
Yeah.
So that's what we are.
Yeah.
So I think that the traces of this is why Glick put that quotation at the front of Triumph of Achilles, because she was asking that question. So let's have a look at some poetry.
Let's do
Stop talking about
it. It will come
all this
back up though,
stuff.
listeners.
Yeah.
It's a good framing to start because
So,
we've touched on so much that we're going to go into here with each of these poems. So it's good to lay out the
yeah.
framework here like we did. Yeah.
Yeah. So have a look on page 5113 of your um, collected poems. And you should find yourself at a poem called Crater Lake, and it's part of the Averno, which is my favorite collection of hers. Have you found that?
Yep,
Do you want to read that?
sure. Crater Lake. There was a war between good and evil. We decided to call the body good. That made death evil. It turned the soul against death completely. Like a foot soldier wanting to serve a great warrior, the soul wanted to side with the body. It turned against the dark, against the forms of death it recognized. Where does the voice come from that says, suppose the war is evil? That says, suppose the body did this to us, made us afraid of love.
Yeah, so it's got that little sort of thing that you've identified that Glick does right at the end, sort of a little painful a thorn in the side of the poem.
Yeah.
But I mean, what do you think of that poem? That is the poem that I found whereby she refers to good and evil directly.
I guess if we talk about maybe there was a war between good and evil, maybe we're talking about the falling of Satan, Don, uh,
Wow, hadn't thought of
Paradise Lost,
wow,
essentially, right?
hadn't thought of bringing Milton into it.
Yeah.
Wow.
And really, what's Milton doing in that is he's expanding on the religious story to a point that makes it, very compelling, like a lot of Paradise Lost when you read it. Of course, there's some stuffy stuff to it, listeners here, but I mean, it helps to read it in a course or something with a professor, but it's also just, it's quite entertaining, particularly the war part. When
Mm,
you have that
mm.
happening, the trickery and stuff, like it is quite, there's a war between good and evil, essentially. And then we decided
Yeah.
to call the body good. Again, that goes back to the religious text, but we could also tie in Milton and Paradise Lost, the kind of war for good and evil.
Well,
Uh,
there is a poem called Paradise in Ararat, isn't there?
yeah, yeah.
That's a thought. That
Uh,
is a thought.
that would be my guess. And then, of course, she has that kind of, we could
Mm,
equate, made us afraid of love and stuff. We could equate war and evil with maybe even the desires of the body. There's always this kind of suspicion about sex and love with Glick. She was always at least the poems come off in this, I mean, I think it's a beautiful way that she does it, where it's a very kind of those in between spaces where she's not quite, you can't quite say that one way or the other, but we could interpret that maybe as the kind of sex, the body, there's always this kind of suspicion, wanted to side with the body, like
yeah.
a foot soldier
Yeah.
wanting to serve a great warrior. The soul wanted to side with the body. It turned against the dark.
No, I think that's a brilliant insight, Andrew. And you could be absolutely honored. I hadn't even thought about that.
Hey,
There
I
was a
love,
war.
I'll take it, Damon. I'll take it. You hear that, listeners? I'm brilliant, and
I mean,
uh,
my interpretation is goes back to Lamentations. So God isn't going to help us because we've asked for the one thing that God can't give us, which is control of our own souls. And that means that Glick can't go into the underworld and be united with her dead sister. And in this collection, Ararat, that is a problem for people in this collection. They can't reunite themselves with the people who have died. The aunts, the grandparents, the mother.
right,
They can't reconnect themselves, and that is a problem throughout the whole connection. So I feel that Glick raises this issue of suffering, which is the issue of good and evil,
hmm.
and she decides to blame God, which is why she paints this amazing picture of him becoming fed up with us and leaving the earth, but still admiring his own creation in a kind
Yeah.
of narcissistic way. Can you have divine narcissism? I don't know.
I you know, I think it is. I mean, this is something I've been more interested in, even from like an intellectual standpoint, but I think also from a spiritual standpoint. Listeners know this. I'm a fan of Jordan Peterson, and just he did this thing recently before his latest kind of, I'm sick thing that he's going through now and out of public life. But his book, We Who Wrestle with God, that came out
Mm,
right before this here, and what he'd been doing the last several years after the kind of political aftermath where he was getting, pilloried all the time in public for saying things that are center right over here in America, at least.
mm,
But he just did these interpretations of the wisdom that is in these Bible stories, and he talks about like it's a constant thing is they ask him, "Do you believe in God?" And he never
mm,
quite answers the question. He
mm.
says, "I act as though he exists."
Yeah.
Like, and it's not quite an answer, right? Like, it's not quite an. But then the more I think about it, the more I'm like, hmm. Maybe that's something like an interpretation like that. This is what complicates the religious stories when you try to take a secular lens over them as just, oh, interesting literature or something, right? Whereas
Mm,
the morality tale, the wisdom tale, the kind of fable aspect of it, like there's something deep in our psychology about this that's a conflict, a deep conflict. Somebody like Glick having this conflict between maybe the traditional kind of Jewish heritage and stuff, and then kind of the more secular world that she lives in. I don't know. I'm just thinking about that, and then I've branched off into other people from other periods of time that have had
well, the
similar kind of
Jewish, well,
interpretations.
interestingly, in the in the Judaic tradition, uh, uh, the belief system is that when children are born, they have a complete understanding of the Torah,
Mm,
and then the rabbi comes in, or the religious representative, I'm not quite sure what you call them, what position they would be in, and they slap the child as a symbolic act to slap out that knowledge from the child.
huh.
It, so they have the knowledge that they're born with all of this knowledge, but they're not allowed to keep it in their conscious minds. That knowledge must go and say, well, okay, what's the point of that? And the point is that you then are in this situation of free choice and you have this deep innate connection to God, but it's never, you can never realize it in the way that it was perfectly within you at the time of your birth. So the Jordan Peterson reference would be, it would make him more sympathetic to, I think, to the Jewish um, perspective on this than to the Christian or the Catholic perspective on this, because obviously with Christians and the Catholic tradition, it's you know it's a question of accepting Christ into your life, and
Right.
then you become a Christian, and you become a better and a better and a better and a better Christian the more that you learn more. But the Peterson, sort of not quite sure about God, but I kind of feel it's some kind of innate presence, you know, very much more to do, and it's a very subtle,
Yeah.
it's a long time since, you know, these great patriarchs of the Bible were sort of sitting around chatting to Yahweh. That was thousands of years ago, and so now it's a more it's it it's a more sort of, I mean, you can't really call it a special relationship given what's going on in the world right now, but it's more of a it's more of uh, an innate connect a connect an innate connection. And how do you explain that?
Right.
And the, the narrative around this within the Jewish faith, I think, is a little bit more convincing, I think, um than than the Christian.
Yeah.
It's nature, nurture, goes back to that.
We discussed this a little bit, listeners that are regular listeners on the Magic Mountain with Maggie Zhu, where we
Yeah.
discussed man in that novel. It was of the time where there was this split amongst academics, right? The kind of religious tradition of academia and studying and stuff, and schooling, and then the kind of new kind of more atheistic, objective, scientific truth is that this is what they're arguing over, and there's great characters. And again, the interesting part about it is that you don't really get an answer, right? Like as Damon and I are trying to do it now, like, we don't really come to an answer. We're just kind of theorizing, but it's just so important to. It was the most interesting part of the novel for me, where there's this
Mm.
kind of there's something baked into the cake because of just, as we said, all these thousands of years that came before us, the thousands of years that came before. If you're hearing this, it's because you are listening to the free public feed of Heavy Board. To get complete, uncensored, uninterrupted, full access to this podcast, become a subscriber at patreon.com/heavyboard. That's right, Heavy Board is made possible by subscribers like you. For less than 1 cup of coffee per month, you will receive private access to uncensored, full-length episodes, Jerk Shop, heavy bonus content, subscribers-only AMA episodes, bonus extended interviews, and more. Come join the conversation today at patreon.com/heavyboard. Glück was writing this book in the late 80s, releasing it in the 90s. It's that just you can't get out, right? Once it's mixed into the batter, no matter how far we stray from it, there's always this innate, like you were saying, thing in them that draws us, that makes us kind of question this little, they're the saying, there's no atheists in foxholes, right?
Mm.
Put yourself in a situation, all of a sudden that goes out the window, right?
Mm. Mm.
Like when your life's on the line in a foxhole or something and bullets are flying
Mm.
overhead, you're praying to something, right?
Mhm.
DFW talked about this in the early 2000s, his famous This Is Water speech, where he says, everybody worships, right? Atheism
Mm.
doesn't exist in the real world. We worship
Mhm.
something. We could worship, intelligence. We could worship science and reason. We could, but we're worshiping those things the same
Mm.
way that these kind of innate little things kind of just we can't quite get them out the back of our head, even if we have this kind of
Mm.
like I would say, I'm atheist. I don't quite believe it. That there's just something about it that I just can't quite believe, but there's still something that makes me question just that
It's
innate
an
little bit.
interesting, yeah, it's an interesting,
I mean, it's a great idea for poetry. I mean, those little
yeah.
contradictions or that little mystery where it lies, great to explore for. But that's why we've had so many books of poems that have done it, throughout history here, and great poets that have
But
tried.
I think that's what Glick's doing. She's
Yeah,
not
yeah,
saying
absolutely. Yeah.
she's not saying I'm fully paid up to the Christian tradition. I'm fully paid up to the Jewish
Right.
tradition. I
It's
mean,
very, very American. Very,
is that
yeah.
very American? Yeah, the melting pot, the famous melting pot. I
Yeah.
mean, I think she said her knowledge of the Jewish religion was very rudimentary, I think.
Yeah.
But she's looking at it from, she's trying to understand why, is it a matter of good and evil that she can't be, that she can't rejoin the soul of her sister? And is it a matter of good and evil that, there seem to be all these conditions preventing that happening?
Yeah.
And I think she's just saying this is the side effects of two different disappointed parties. We're disappointed in God because he's left us to deal with our own problems, and we wish that, God would deal with our problems, or at least look as, show a bit more interest. And from God's point of view, he's disappointed in us, as he's shown in the, in this great story of the flood, because given free choice, we can't be trusted with free choice,
Yeah.
to celebrate his beautiful, God's beautiful creation. So we're both disappointed, and I think that's how Glick presents it,
Yeah.
really. She's sort of, yeah, okay. Let's go to the poems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wasn't crazy about this first poem, but I think it does kind of set the tone. As I was reading through, I kind of went back to it and was like, okay, so this really does. This is where I got that
Mm,
kind of like the first poem kind of sets the tone of this is a life and death. This is what this book is
mm,
about. It's going to be about life and death. And like I said, I wasn't crazy about it. I did like the one right after it, fan of fantasy. And a novel like those I thought were there was a time in this first part of the book where I was like, okay, I like this, I like this, I like this. I don't know. What did you think of the first poem?
Well, do you want to read it? Why don't you read it? I mean, I think it's worth
Sure.
reading. Yeah.
Yeah. Parados.
That means entrance to the stage, by the way. So
And
you're in a side
fitting
room before you're getting ready to go onto the stage. Yeah.
and fitting for this to start the collection like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Long ago I was wounded. I learned to exist in reaction, out of touch with the world. I'll tell you what I meant to be, a device that listened, not inert, still, a piece of wood, a stone. Why should I tire myself debating, arguing? Those people breathing in the other beds could hardly follow, being uncontrollable, like any dream. Through the blinds, I watched the moon in the night sky shrinking and swelling. I was born to a vocation, to bear witness to the great mysteries. Now that I've seen both, birth and death, I know. To the dark nature, these are proofs, not mysteries.
Okay, so she's saying right at the beginning that she's out of touch with the world. Why is she out of touch with the world? She's out of touch with the world. So that's what she's saying here at the beginning of the poem. And then, um,
I think there's a little bit of religious implication in that as well as to be still, right? To be in,
not in
uh,
a still,
yeah,
possibly a device that listened.
right.
And then, she said at the end, now that I've seen both birth and death, I know to the dark nature these are proofs, not mysteries. And I was born with a vocation to bear witness to the great mysteries, but I know that they're not mysteries, they're proofs. Proofs. You see, she's climbing out of that uh, uncertainty, about good and evil, about suffering. She's saying, I can't get into the mystery. My way into the mystery is blocked. So I'm just going to talk about the proofs of the mystery. And I think that's why a lot of these poems in this connection, they're almost on the surface, aren't they? You're talking about things that happen. And I think we should do something now that you're allowed to do in poetry, but you're not allowed to do in novels, which is skip to the ending. So if you go to page 242, now this is the last poem in the connection. It's called First Memory, very short, one stanza. It says, shall I read it or do you want to read it?
Sure, you can read it out. It's a little short
Uh,
one, but it has that first line is important.
okay, you go for it. Go on then, Andrew.
Long ago, I was wounded. I lived to revenge myself against my father, not for what he was, for what I was from the beginning of time. In childhood, I thought that pain meant I was not loved. It meant I loved.
Yeah. So I changed that last line because I thought I could improve it. So I changed it from I thought the pain meant I was not loved, it meant I loved, to I thought the pain meant I was not loved, it meant I could love. And she's talking about the same things in these two poems, isn't she? She's saying, in the first poem, I'm out of touch with the world. Why is she out of touch with the world? She's out of touch with the world because she wasn't loved. That's what she's saying. And she wanted to revenge herself against one or other of her parents from that and against her childhood. And she's done that by proving, offering her proof, and she's stepping away from the mystery. She's going to come back to the mystery in later connections. And the previous collection, Descending Figure and Triumph of Achilles, these are all about she's trying to get into the mystery. She's trying to break that down, that poem Liberation. She's trying to tear it apart to be both the huntress and the victim. But in this collection, she's saying, I'm just going to offer you the proofs. This is what happens. You decide. She's not actually saying you decide
Right.
because she's already decided for us. But that sort of sets the tone for me for the, for all these poems, really.
Again, that kind of great, right? The almost coming of age realization, right? Where you get this kind of, you think, that when you're in pain, it's because of something that bad has happened, but it's almost a rare positive poem from Glick. Dare we say this last one? First memory? Almost
It's
a rare
it's it's
positive,
saying
like
it's saying that it's saying what's positive. I suppose what's positive about it. Yeah, she's saying that because I wasn't loved, I can now be loved because I've offered all of these proofs as to how I wasn't loved. I can now love
it's
because, and also she's
yin
saying taking her revenge. Has she taken her revenge? I'm not quite sure about that.
and just like the yin and yang, right?
I don't know. I
Well,
mean, I've got this big problem over the word forgiveness. I mean, people use it and they use it all the time, and they sort of, it's like it's assumed that people know what it means, but I think it's an incredibly difficult,
yeah.
entangled word.
This is why the religious texts are so preoccupied with forgiveness. Yes, because it's so
And I'm not sure it really exists. I've never
yeah,
been sure.
interesting.
I've never been sure that it exists. And in this poem, First Memory, the last poem in this collection, she's almost saying she's not convinced either. Said, I was wounded. I lived to revenge myself against my father. So I've offered all of these proofs and I've tried to revenge myself against him from the beginning of time, from childhood. And she doesn't say I'm forgiving anybody, does she?
No, and
And yeah, she certainly doesn't forgive her mother, that's for sure.
yeah, and I wonder if it is like because I imagine I'm assuming I don't know I'm assuming this happened. Her father died in the middle of her writing this collection
Let's have a look.
because I mean
He died in
maybe
1986. So yeah, she was on her way to writing this collection
yeah
because
right
there was
after
five-year
Triumph yeah
gap. Yeah.
right after Triumph yeah so she
But she
gets
doesn't, I
all
mean,
these prizes and then her father dies. Interesting. Or just I mean like it's that you don't know what you have until it's gone, right? Type of thing where we take it for granted when it's in front of us. In fact, we even view ourselves as like we need to revenge ourselves or something or avenge ourselves over this
well, she never
this
says
situation we were put in. But then it meant I loved. It
she
meant
never
that I
says,
did love because of this pain that I have now that it's gone, right? That like I'm not going to get
yeah,
it back.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah. Now
Almost
these
like a
now,
coming of age realization in a certain way.
exactly. But she never says in all of her poetries that I can find, I mean, we might come across it, but she never says what her father did. She says what her mother did. So let's go to Lullaby, page 212, which is the 10th poem in this collection. And it's very clear what her mother's done in this. It's quite a long poem, but I'll just read the start. My mother is an expert in one thing, sending people she loves into the other world. Ah, dear. The little ones, the babies. I mean, it's not her mother's fault that her firstborn child died. Is it after 7 days? It's not, but we'll get on to what she's done. The little ones, the babies, these she rocked, whispering or singing quietly. I can't say what she did for my father. Whatever it was, I'm sure it was right. It's the same thing, really, preparing a person for sleep, for death, the lullabies. They all say, don't be afraid. That's how they paraphrase the heartbeat of the mother. So the living slowly grow calm. It's only the dying who can't and who refuse. Now then, so if we go to Um, it's either a fantasy, a birthday, or widows. Let's have a look. 208. No, it's not widows. Um, okay, so fantasy. It's where her mother draws um the life of the child who's died into the earth, and there's no love left for the surviving children. Yeah. So it's it's sort of it's sort of connected in several of these poems, but it's actually in Lost Love on page 211. Do you want to read that?
Yes, where am I thinking of?
Very,
Lost
very,
Love was one I marked. Yeah, I really enjoyed that.
yeah,
I
very
said
important
Damon,
poem.
I wrote in my notes here, I was like, Damon, here it is.
Yeah,
Direct reference to
absolutely.
the dead sister. There's no symbol. It is direct right
Oh, it
here. We
is.
got
It
it.
is absolutely direct. Yeah.
The
No,
most
no, yeah,
direct, maybe the most direct she ever wrote about it is this one right here,
yeah.
Lost Love.
She's not trying to conceal anything. She's just going, this is, yeah, yeah,
Which is maybe why I felt such a stark like difference from the first four books to this one and her stuff, and then
yeah.
knowing what she does after this too. There's really no other
Mm.
book like this one in
No,
particular, and really no other poem
no,
like this one.
yeah.
But yeah, let me read it here, and we'll get to talking. Lost Love. My sister spent a whole life in the earth. She was born, she died. In between, not one alert look, not one sentence. She did what babies do. She cried. But she didn't want to be fed. Still, my mother held her, trying to change first fate, then history. Something did change when my sister died. My mother's heart became very cold, very rigid, like a tiny pendant of iron. Then it seemed to me my sister's body was a magnet. I could feel it draw my mother's heart into the earth so it would grow.
And that is the Wild Iris.
Yeah, you can see, especially towards there's a couple poems, particularly
Mm,
direct to flowers, that where you can see this blossoming, the kind of the next book coming almost, which is always great when we do these in order, complete works. You see the growth, you see the little I hints, the little kernels of ideas coming to fruition, and it's just very,
yeah,
thrilling to see that. Yeah.
yeah. So this is what her mother's done. She's followed her sister's body into the earth, and there's no love there for, or real love for the sister, the daughter who follows, which is Louise herself. So it's quite, I mean, it's very unfair. It's very unforgiving. To use your word, it's cruel.
Yeah.
Um,
It's making me think of
but
that first memory where, I thought that pain was that I wasn't loved, but it was that
yeah,
I loved. So we have this lost love. We can interpret that literally, and it works in the poem. But I think it means more metaphorically, literally losing love, having that loss of something that you love so dearly. And I know most, people listening to this that don't have children, and I've tried to go into this a little bit. It's very hard to explain here. There is a part of your brain, there is a part of your soul, let's go as far as to say that maybe, that is awakened when you hold that baby and you just feel that forever. And then to have that
yeah,
loss is probably worse than anything else, worse than a parent dying, worse than a spouse, having that loss in particular. I mean, you hear it all the
mm,
time. I mean, it destroys people, it destroys marriages, it destroys relationships. I mean, it's just such a deep cut, that lost love, if we're going to keep reading into it as a metaphor here, that, what else can you do except bury yourself in the ground, kind of with it, and
yeah.
just, there's always a dam, that scar tissue is always going to be visible somewhere because it is hard to describe that attachment, that the love that you feel unconditionally.
So
Um,
going back to Parados, would you say that was a proof?
of
A
dying.
proof of a proof of her, gosh, this is beginning to sound like a lawyer in a court, isn't she?
Yeah,
Sort of
yeah.
reading the list of charges for the prosecution. But I mean,
My
would you?
mind originally went to mathematical proofs. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, mathematical proof. So I mean, would you say that was a proof of how she's ended up at the end?
Hmm,
Does that justify that final poem, First
hmm.
Memory? Would you say that she has presented the proof as to why she wasn't loved as a child and the effect that that had on her from the beginning of time, and that her childhood was ensconced in this never-ending pain of absent or missing love? Or, is that a proof?
Uh, I mean, hard to say. Maybe, maybe if we're gonna interpret it as a proof, like I would say almost like mathematical proof, where it's kind of just a law, right? I mean, she's trying to refer to it as a law of nature in some way.
It's really, I mean, it's not, only she would know, only she would be able to say, yes, you've interpreted this poem correctly, and, or you haven't interpreted it correctly, and yes, that is the proof that I'm offering. But it seems to me to be pretty clear, I think. And you do meet people, and there'll be lots of people listen to Heavy Board, who feel that their childhoods had love missing from them, and that has consequences. And it's the parents often behave as if, that just by, to use one of my parents' phrases, coping with life. Love the word coping.
Yeah.
If they're coping with life, then they're doing right by their children. But what their children really want is their parents' love and undivided attention. And if you haven't got that, and that's why I think that's something that you could think about with this book, Andrew. So it's not just about death and the tragedy of all of that, but it is about an examination of missing love
Yeah.
and the effects of that, and how that can be described as a kind of death. Um, and it does end on a positive note. This collection, I feel that she does come through it with a measure of that she's overcome it.
And the desire and the pursuit of the whole is called love. That
Mm,
Plato quote, right? Yeah.
mm, yeah,
To feel whole or to feel complete. Like there is
yeah,
that. Yeah.
yeah,
It might arguably be the most important thing in the human psyche to feel that wholeness in some way.
exactly. Now
Yeah.
she's still got problems in life, as she enters adulthood. She wants not to want, the whole anorexia. She doesn't trust
Right.
husbands, she doesn't trust life, she doesn't trust art, she doesn't trust her. She pushes material towards a transmutation that never actually happens. The material doesn't respond. Often it's just dead on arrival. She's just asking herself, she's pushing herself into places and then nothing happens, like as in Marathon, where she goes on this long walk with Soul in the Body, hoping to meet her sister, never happens. But this I feel it's some kind of a launch pad, I think, into adulthood, really, and to say, that despite all of this, I have found my way, perhaps.
Yeah.
Let's go to one of the poems I really like, which is quite soon after. It's Lover of Flowers. Um, so it's page 207. This, I think, is one of the strongest in the collection. So the thing I like about this poem is it brings all of the actors together in the same scene. Uh, and uh, perhaps you could read the first couple of stanzas because I don't think we need the rest of the poem sort of falls away a bit, but I really like the first two stanzas.
Yeah, and this is the one I marked it as well, where it just kind of occurred to me that like, okay, we're going into confessional,
Yeah,
in this
or
way.
very close to it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
much more than previous books. And then, of course, it kind of compounds because then we have that poem on 209 Confession right out as you're reading through. I was just jotting notes. But yes,
yeah.
lover of flowers. In our family, everyone loves flowers. That's why the graves are so odd. No flowers, just padlocks of grass. And in the center, plaques of granite. The inscriptions terse, the shallow letters, sometimes fill in with dirt. To clean them out, you use your handkerchief. With my sister, it's different. It's an obsession. Weekends, she sits on my mother's porch, reading catalogs. Every autumn, she plants bulbs by the brick stoop. Every spring, waits for flowers. No one discusses cost. It's understood. My mother pays. After all, it's her garden. Every flower planted for my father. They both see the house as his true grave. Not everything thrives on Long Island. Sometimes the summer gets too hot. Sometimes a heavy rain beats down the flowers. That's how the poppies died, after one day, because they're very fragile. My mother's tense, upset about my sister. Now she'll never know how beautiful they were, pure pink with no dark spots. That means she's going to feel deprived again. But for my sister, that's the condition of love. She was my father's daughter. The face of love to her is the face turning away.
I really like the start of that poem. In our family, everyone loves flowers. I think that's a lot. That's sort of um, it's a very uniting image to me. Um, if you think about, you were talking earlier, weren't you, about uh, blood families and your family, etc. But I mean, if you were to talk about your blood family, your relatives, is there a single unifying thing that you all love? I mean, you're all crazy about NASCAR or
Right.
uh,
Uh,
uh
Hard to say, yeah, that we all love. Hard to say.
it's not an easy question to answer, is it?
Yeah.
But Glick does it in this poem. In our family, everyone loves flowers, and then I think it's a lovely little portrait of her sister, um, planting bulbs and looking in the catalogs. And it doesn't matter what, just choosing on the most beautiful looking flowers that they can find. And then the mother pays for it all. And then at the end of the poem, it all gets very twisty and very turny. And my mother's tense, upset about my sister. Now she'll never know how beautiful they were. Okay, so I think that's the first born. So Glick is the firstborn, and her sister, who died, is also the firstborn. So they're locked in this relationship with the mother, two firstborns and the mother. But then the other sister, Therese, she has a different life, and she enjoys the love of her father, and that's in the last stanza. But for my sister, that's the condition of love. He was my father's daughter. She was my father's daughter. So her sister is in receipt of love from the father. I mean, it goes back to what I was saying about the father earlier. We never quite know what he's done, but maybe this is what he's done. Maybe this is his proof, Andrew.
The
This is his
sibling
proof.
rivalry.
He loves Therese more than he loves Louise because he can see that Louise and her mother have this kind of problem, this firstborn problem, which they're never going to resolve. They're always going to be at each other. Well, Louise Glick is always going to be at her mother over it. And the birth of the second daughter is a new start, isn't it? And maybe that's the proof that she has. Maybe that's what weighs with her against her father. Maybe she's actually saying that here. Yeah, I think that's what's happening. The
Yeah.
face of love to her is the face turning away to me. Yeah. So it all gets a bit sort of, into those darker, choppy waters at the end. But it starts off in this lovely sort of place, I think. In our family, everyone flowers. I mean, I think that's so
Yeah.
lovely.
That's something
So we
too
all,
where there's the work of gardening is always a great symbol for poetry and all of that as well. But
yeah,
and we have a
but
lot
we
of that, right? Like her right before this, that the mother's heart going into the earth to grow, right? There's the flower reference, the
I don't think it's
roots and
growing,
stuff.
Andrew. It's going into the earth, but it's not coming back again. I don't think.
Still,
Yeah.
um, oh, I mean, this is that's just what it says, right?
Mm. So we ought to talk about Mount Ararat. I don't think we need to say very much about that. But it is the title poem, and it's about, well, it's about a third of the way through this collection, isn't it? And again, I think the part that I would point out is maybe in the second stanza when it says, um, for the most part, in our family, we had sons, not daughters. Now that puzzled me. That puzzled me for a long time before I started reading Lick in any kind of systematic way. But now, of course, what she's talking about there is Noah's sons. She's talking about the ark. So she's flipped back into sitting in the ark um with her family and Noah's family. At least that's my interpretation. Because of course their family all had daughters, not sons. So, I
Yeah.
think that's the only. And then at the end it says, like the earth itself, every stone here is dedicated to the Jewish God who doesn't hesitate to take a son from a mother.
Oh, yes.
Do you know what that's about?
Well, I'd assume it's about Abraham
Yeah,
is
I
the
think
big
so
one,
too.
yeah, with Isaac and
Yeah, and
Jacob. Yeah.
That's where Abraham's peeping out in this collection. And it's just fractional, and you wouldn't necessarily spot it, but I think that's him.
And
The
almost
third,
even putting the mother of in the situation of that too. And then maybe it's even feminist to focus on the mother's angle because the Bible doesn't even really focus on that angle too much.
no,
It's more on the
no,
father. But then
yeah,
you think of the mother knowing that the son is going there to be sacrificed, blah blah blah.
exactly.
That's it
Mm.
definitely who doesn't hesitate to take a son from a mother. Yeah, and this
So
is
yeah,
again very confessional.
so they're all in this arc. The poem's called Mount Ararat. You know, they're all there, I think, and they're all dealing with these family issues, issues of good and evil, issues of suffering,
And I think calling it Mount
issues of
Ararat
what next.
too, where
Yeah.
that line in the third stanza, it's a sign that maybe the debt's finally been paid. Maybe they're at the end of this. What she kind of vaguely references the family curse, right? Um,
Do you think there is a family? Where does that come in?
um, where we said, to this day, I can't bring myself to watch my aunt and my mother, though the more I try to escape seeing their suffering, the more it seems the fate of our family. Each branch donates one girl child to the earth. Uh, in my
Okay.
yeah,
Okay, so in that sense, then firstborn sister is not the only death of a firstborn child in
supposedly
in 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 their family.
her
It
cousin, yeah,
must have happened
nothing.
before.
Well, that nothing's sadder than my sister's grave, unless it's the grave of my cousin next to her. And
Mm.
she's talking about her aunt and her
Okay.
mother. So I guess they each had a young
Okay.
daughter die in those days.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Right before we kind of really just kind of completely eliminated infant mortality in a
Yeah.
made it a very
Yeah.
small, right before
Yeah.
modern medicine was making sure that that usually didn't happen without being born with some massive defect or something like that, or something didn't form right, or whatever the kind of various syndromes and things. But if it's just a
Yeah.
healthy boy and girl, we usually we're kind
Yeah.
of past them having a any type of risk of death in the first. Although it's not completely gone, it's not completely gone, but it's still, yeah. I don't know. There's something like that, and I think maybe even like calling it that, because again, the Mount Ararat's supposed to be the happy ending of the story, right? Like they survive the turmoil and they come
Well,
out alive.
it's the beginning of everything all over again, isn't it? As in
Right.
her last,
Yeah.
as in her last poem, First Memory. It is called First Memory, isn't it? Yeah, First
Yeah.
Memory. So it's like first memory. Now that the waters have receded, now that the earth is prepared for everything to begin all over again. So yeah, that works. So let's go to, unless you want to look at anything, let's go to The Untrustworthy Speaker, which is one of her most important poems that she ever wrote, I think, in terms of bringing some perspective to how to read her poetry, I think. So it's like a primer. It's like a bit of a primer, really. Um, do you want to could you read It's quite a long poem, Andrew, but I
Sure.
think, do you want to read it?
The untrustworthy speaker. Don't listen to me. My heart's been broken. I don't see anything objectively. I know myself. I've learned to hear like a psychiatrist. When I speak passionately, that's when I'm least to be trusted. It's very sad, really. All my life, I've been praised for my intelligence, my powers of language, of insight. In the end, they're wasted. I never see myself standing on the front steps, holding my sister's hand. That's why I can't account for the bruises on her arm where the sleeve ends. In my own mind, I'm invisible. That's why I'm dangerous. People like me, who seem selfless, we're the cripples, the liars, we're the ones who should be factored out in the interest of truth. When I'm quiet, that's when the truth emerges. A clear sky, the clouds like white fibers. Underneath, a little gray house, the azaleas red and bright pink. If you want the truth, you have to close yourself to the older daughter, block her out. When a living thing is hurt like that, in its deepest workings, all function is altered. That's why I'm not to be trusted, because a wound to the heart is also a wound to the mind.
Yeah, that's a very important line, that a wound to the heart is also a wound to the mind, because she's been hurt by this feeling of not being loved by either of her two parents, actually, but for different reasons. Um, it's it's destabilized her mind, and
Poets love to say they're unstable, yeah.
yeah,
But I
yeah,
mean, the heart and mind connection or whatever, it's often something we try to separate. We're like, oh, do you feel it in your heart or in your head? Right? Are you using your heart or your head? And the real answer is like, they're intertwined, right? Um,
yeah,
you know, that but yeah, I mean, it's always interesting, the untrustworthy speaker. And I think she does this in all of her work, right? And I think this is something that, again, poets and poetry enthusiasts listening, you know, it is often a mistake to just assume an I in the poem is the speaker. Now, I think there are obviously exceptions to that, and I think most of 20th century, latter half of 20th century poetry, you can kind of safely assume that the I is some, resemblance to the speaker in some way. But, there is usually a speaker in a poem, and there's, at least in scholarship, they like to say that it's not necessarily the poet, which is, true and not true, and depending on what you're looking at and what time period and all of that. But
but you remember me saying to you, it's one thing to be untrustworthy, but you do need to know when you can trust a poet. And I think there are, in this collection, Blick is giving us a couple of reasons to trust her. And this poem is one of the reasons. I think the last poem is an important reason. And this is an important reason. She's saying, don't trust what I'm saying, which is kind of quite Glickian,
right, which
but
is why I
she,
always no, please finish. Yeah.
yeah, no, carry on.
Well, I
Right.
mean, just going off that, I was just thinking that's, because of all these references to the father, and like we said, we don't quite know what the father did. There's some hints
Yeah.
that she, wasn't the favorite child, that her sister was the favorite of her father. Hints of that. But then again, at the same time, it's like, yeah, how much should we read into it? How much of this is being honest completely, and how much of this is embellishing? How much of this is, just messing around because you're writing a poem and it feels like it's what you should do? I mean, it's hard to
No,
take it as, yeah.
she is dead serious about this because I mean in her Nobel Prize speech, do you remember she said that she she's always since very early childhood the idea of the connection between the reader and the writer is something that's incredibly important to her. And when I was, when I read through that speech, I think it's a video of her actually, um, uh, sort of going over some of the main ideas in that Nobel speech that she gave. You could tell she was really serious about that, and I was thinking, well, she just doesn't do that. She doesn't put the reader and the poet on the same page, but she does try, really try in this connection. And I think that she does succeed in this collection in a way that she might not, perhaps so much in the others. So it's it's one of the hardest jobs in poetry, I think, to do that, Andrew. And you shouldn't minimize it. For the writer to hope that the person who is reading the poem to feel the same set of feelings and the same emotional ramping up of of the causes of that, that led to that poem. That's a lot to achieve. It's a lot to ask in just, a little block of text. So, um, it's a very ambitious thing to try and want to do. And and she's saying here in this poem, you know, don't trust me. I think maybe she's saying, I, this is the only poem where I think the word psychiatrist comes in.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
I noticed
as
that
far
as
as
well. Yeah.
yeah, and I think she's saying, I'm trying to be as clear as I can be about my motivations, about my proofs, and about my mysteries. I'm trying to be clear about that. And in fact, I'm trying so hard that whereas my last two collections were full of mysteries, I'm now going to give you the proofs. That's how serious I am about this. I want you to understand as a reader, I want you to understand what I'm writing about. So I think I think there's a sort of level of honesty in this, which I think is quite an openness, which is very helpful. When when you're in the labyrinths of trying to figure out what on earth she's writing about, you come back to this poem and you think, well, yeah, you know, got to give her some credit for that. That's the way I see it.
And the guard is down in this collection. Like you said,
Yeah,
yeah,
all the way,
yeah.
all the way through.
Uh,
So going on from that, Andrew, what do you want before we get to maybe? I'd like to talk a little bit about Brown Circle again, um, and children coming home from school. I mean, how are you, uh, are there any that you've got marked down? I mean,
the ones,
as you say, a lot of these are sort of slightly repetitive. Once you've got the general, what she's talking about, it's, they come in sequences, don't they? The mother poems, the father poems, the living sister poems, the dead sister poems, her son poems, they start sort of collecting themselves together.
yeah, there was and we don't have to say too much about it, but that one, a novel on 205, I marked that only because I thought at first I was like, oh, okay, no one could write a novel about this family, but then like it's very Glick, right? Like the way that the form kind of takes. on to actually telling kind of a novel-like story about the family as it progresses through, but also like starting it off with saying no one could write a novel about this family, but then it kind of creates one, right? I was like, okay, that's very Glick, very skillfully done. And yeah, we did Mount Ararat. It was about the next page here. Around appearances,
Yeah.
uh, around appearances where I was starting to think to myself, and that's page 214. I started to think to myself, man, this might be her most redundant book so far because appearances is, I think, like the fourth or fifth poem about this, uh,
Scenes from her childhood connected to her mother.
yeah, and the
Yeah.
siblings and all of that and things like that. And I also noticed in this poem appearances where, and I said
It's
this
all over
already,
the
but
place.
it's kind of all over the place. Like it's kind of not nearly as tight as Glick had come to be known already. We talked about in the previous 4 hours long episodes. Listeners, again, go back and listen to those so you can hear like the contrast. But it's especially those stanzas just seem kind of, I don't know, maybe almost Walt Whitman-esque, the way the lines just keep carrying on. And that's not something she ever really did before,
Well, if
or
you
really
remember,
since when she moves on from this book here. Yeah.
yeah, if you remember the last pod I mentioned just at the end, I said that there were some dark metaphysical poems in Ararat, and I said I thought there were four. Well, I've completely sort of changed my mind about that.
Yeah.
But I think this is because, as I said earlier, I did assume that there would be long poems about her father, and Metamorphosis in the Triumph of Achilles, but they're just not here. Um, and I think that this one was probably one that I would have mistaken for an extended dark metaphysical poem, but it never really got there. And I think Celestial Music later on in the collection, towards the end of the collection, which I really like actually, it's a really balanced, long piece of work. Um, I think neither of those have the sort of that driving Glick sort of
Yeah.
engine that turns them into the dark metaphysical poems.
She's
But it's almost,
she's slowing down a little bit, kind of lingering in the scenes. And I think even in that, the
yeah.
second to last stanza in this one's very long, and kind of not quite repetitive, but there are just like the same ideas are just kind of being churned over. She's kind of letting herself settle into these a little bit. You like
Well,
keep kind of,
she's telling us a few little things, just a few more. The house had a blue couch or a blue
right,
sofa. In the summer, they visited Paris and they had their portraits painted. Um, and the name of the portrait painter was Monsieur Davanzo. And it was an experience that she went through with her sister. I think that's sort of like they both went through it together. And there are a few poems about them doing things together, like going through the catalogs and choosing flowers. And I think it's just a portrait of family life. And yeah, I can see that it's like a little bit irrelevant, maybe. And it's not particularly brilliant, but
right,
it just sort of it just sits there as part of the, you know, I was and I do like her relaxed work much more. The work that doesn't have that sort of,
right.
sort of um highly emotive engine going behind it. It's I like it when she relaxes and dials down and says, yeah, this is just appearance, this poem about appearances, and it's about having our portraits painted and how we appeared in the portraits and the difference between um, how we saw each other and how we were seen in the portraits. And did that have any bearing on anything in terms of moving my relationship with my parents any
Right.
further? Well, no, it didn't really, but it's almost like a negative. You can have insights by the negative as opposed to as opposed to sort of a brilliant idea about something. You say, well, this didn't happen. You know, we went through this experience of having our portraits painted. Then Andrew Wittstadt read it, uh, in 2026, and it didn't have much impact on him, and it didn't have much impact on us, really. It's just one of those things
Right.
that happens in family life, like, going out and kicking a ball around in the garden, you
Yeah.
know. So I quite like it for that reason.
She really wants us to know that she's not like other girls. Yeah, that
Yeah,
her
she
her
does.
sister is the one that's
Yeah,
like other girls, not her. She's the
yeah, yeah,
stoic, quiet one.
yeah. And
Uh,
I bet Monsieur Davanzo had a lot of time, fun painting her curly blonde hair of her sister,
it's also
as
funny
opposed.
too. Is like they went to Paris and they got portraits done. I was like,
Yeah,
it's not something
exactly.
most families do. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's quite a
yeah,
thing that most
yeah.
people probably didn't have in their life. So that's interesting.
And
Uh,
I just to go back a bit, but in
Please,
confession, um, there's a talking
confession. Yeah,
there's a whole issue about them being the three fates, which I kind of outlined in the Triumph of Achilles as well. So she's kind of ready, isn't she? She's there with she's one of the fates, and her sister's another one of the fates if she can get her sister to take it seriously. Um,
they are
and then
sisters,
yeah,
savages. In the end, they
and
have
then the
no
third fate.
emotion
If
but
they could
envy.
if they could get their sort of, their sort of psychic energy up to a certain point, then maybe these fates could actually come into the presence of this arc and start doing some real sort of damage. But you can imagine her sitting next to her sister just having a portrait painted. And there's, Louise thinking, I want to be a fate and I want my sister to be a fate and I want us to get together with our dead sister. And I want to sort of start changing some of the deep frustrations that I'm feeling about my childhood.
Yeah, that was interesting too, considering we have a poem called Confession.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's the one with the where she announces herself as a fate.
and
Yeah.
it's really small, and I think that's kind of, yeah, because my initial question when I was reading that, it was right after Lover of Flowers,
Hmm.
and I've written down notes, and I was like, oh, this is very confessional. Now I turn the page, Widows, which is a very tragic poem, then we have Confession, and I'm like, okay, Confession, and it's the smallest, maybe the smallest poem apart from that last one, First Memory. I think
Yeah.
First Memory is technically the smallest. But yeah, I don't know. I was just thinking to myself like, oh, okay, so this is just straight up calling it confession. Uh, and then this kind of, yeah, I mean, we've talked about this because it's all throughout her work, this kind of the female rivalry between sisters or even friends or some, I don't know, mothers and daughters. There's always this little bit of conflict between it, particularly and it's not absent from male relationships with the or whatever, but I think there is just this it's inherently kind of a female thing to have this kind of competition between them. And again, that's not, I'm not saying that, male siblings or whatever aren't competitive with each other. They are. It's about what they're competitive at, kind of things like this
Yeah,
where
they're competing for their father's love, I suppose, and the
right,
attention
it's
and
very
the firstborn's always got this sort of like, oh, great, everybody's looking towards me to sort of, be the one in charge to look after the younger ones when they're off doing something else. It's a burden, isn't it?
And
It's
it's
often
just I'm only
deep
drawing from
sighs.
my own experience, whereas I have a brother and a sister, but my sister doesn't have a sister, right? She only has two
Yeah,
brothers. But
yeah,
like it just
exactly.
I don't know. So it's just things like that do set up a dynamic,
Yeah,
and
sure.
then
It's
you
like
then
a,
you
it's like a, yeah, it's like a heart-sinking moment.
and you kind
And
of just
yeah,
carry that into adult, it kind of we've
yeah,
talked
you
about this
do. Yeah,
before, going into adulthood, and I've talked about it on other episodes. And then every time you get back with your siblings and stuff and your parents around holidays or something, there is always kind of that dynamic comes back into that child dynamic comes back into play. The oldest, the middle, the youngest, like who is
yeah,
taken more seriously, who has more sway when they're saying something to mom and dad.
yeah,
There's
yeah.
just always comes in, and maybe I don't know, you maybe we're getting at something like that with Glick. Yeah.
Well, that's a bit like, I mean, is Cosmopolitan still going as a magazine, or I don't know?
Yes, like all
It is
magazines,
still going,
it's
right?
on the decline, but it's still out there. Yeah,
Okay,
because I
right.
think
So
it's
it's
owned
like,
by Condé Nast or one of the big conglomerates now that just
okay,
those are the only
so
ones
it's
that can
like,
survive.
so it's
In a
like a
way.
sort of, well, flip over the pages, and this issue. We've been invited to the Glicks over in Long Island, and here they are having their portraits painted, and here they are in these different situations. And I think that, what she's doing, she's presenting these sort of these sort of page spreads, saying this is what we were doing over here, this is what we were doing over here, and it's she's staying away from the mysteries. She's staying away from the sort of the underworld. She's staying away from the dark metaphysics. She's staying away from all of her phobias and anxieties. I mean, here's one.
I
This
want,
is
you know,
new
it's
work.
something about the mothers too. As I've noticed this too when we are around and something like that, I'll be like, huh, what's going on with this? There's just something about that, and I think Glick does capture that dynamic, right? Where she's a little bit envious of the other sibling that maybe gets to do that with the parents, and she doesn't,
Yeah,
right? Uh,
yeah.
I had a this goes back to high school. I went to a Catholic high school in Maryland, and we were taught by not a lot, but there were a few still left, Christian brothers that were teaching at the school. One of the chemistry teachers, Brother Don, I'll never forget this because he started sobbing in the middle of class telling us this story where he said growing up, he was always the smart one in his family, right? He was the one that did really well in school, always got straight A's, became an engineer before he became a Christian brother and had a successful career and stuff doing all of that. And he said his brother was, the one that struggled and stuff. And he said he would get really upset about, mom and dad praising his younger brother because, for getting a B or something on his report card. And he said one time he came in, he said he was about 12 years old and he was just really mad and he just said, you know, why are you always talking about him? Like he got a B. Like he's like, I got all A's on this, and you're talking about him still, like. And this is when he started crying, and it's a room full of imagine 16-year-old boys, like sitting in this room with him, all boys Catholic school, where have our ties on and all of that, and he's in his brother robes, and it was a chemistry class, but he starts telling us this story, and he starts breaking down into tears, and he said they came to him and they said, my son, you know, the reason we do that is because you don't need the extra help. You don't need us to praise you for this. Like you're already doing it. Your brother,
That's a
you
very
know,
Christian response, isn't
right.
it?
It's like your brother
Yeah.
needs it. He needs us constantly on his back. He needs us to praise lesser work than what you do and stuff like that. And I was just,
Mm,
it was just a beautiful little moment thing. And, we have this grown man in front of us crying about this memory as he's telling us. I'll never forget it. It's a very emotional thing. And I think Glick is capturing something like that little bit of that, the sibling rivalry, yes, but it's more than that, right? It's this
she is,
competition
and
for
she's,
love,
yeah,
yeah, in a way.
definitely.
Or at least
And
how the
also,
child perceives it. The parents don't perceive it as them giving the child less love, but the child perceives that. Uh,
yeah.
yeah.
And she's presenting that. I mean, there's a nice poem, New World, on
Yes, I have that
page
as well. And this one was
219.
very powerful
Yeah.
for me
Do you want to,
right now.
do you want to read that one?
Sure, yeah. And this one was maybe just because of where I am, but I found it a very powerful poem reading through all the way.
Mm.
So, New World. As I saw it, all my mother's life, my father held her down like lead strapped to her ankles. She was buoyant by nature. She wanted to travel, go to the theater, go to museums. What he wanted was to lie on the couch with the Times over his face so that death, when it came, wouldn't seem a significant change. In couples like this, where the agreement is to do things together, it's always the active one who concedes, who gives. You can't go to museums with someone who won't open his eyes. I thought my father's death would free my mother. In a sense, it has. She takes trips, looks at great art, but she's floating, like some child's balloon that gets lost the minute it isn't held, or like an astronaut who somehow loses the ship and has to drift in space, knowing, however long it lasts, this is what's left of being alive. She's free, in that sense, without relation to Earth.
Yeah. That's a nice, it's a nice insight, isn't it? It's a sort of portrait of how the creative one in a relationship has to give way to the less creative one. And being sympathetic towards her mother, actually. It's a very rare example of a poem where Glick is being sympathetic towards her mother. But there are shades in this, shades of different illuminations in this collection. And that this is a really good example of that, where, where it's a slightly different, more of a wider, more balanced, involvement. I mean, and there's also that sort of people talk about Glick's poetry as being humorous, which I find pretty baffling,
Yeah.
only. But I mean that
I think
this
that's a cope, to use
yeah,
the term. Yeah, to say that it's humorous,
but
the same
this
way that people say Wharton is a satirist is to cope with
yeah,
what's on the
okay.
page there.
But
Yeah.
this in the second stanza, what he wanted was to lie on the couch with the Times over his face, so that death, when it came, wouldn't seem a significant change. Now, I think that's, I suppose that's sort of, you could a wry smile, I don't know, maybe even a slight chuckle.
Right.
And it's a good description of married life, really, and
Yeah.
how, maybe two people who weren't meant to get married got married, um and it's sort of, it's not really a balanced relationship if one of them is wants to do things and the other one is unresponsive and isn't going to go to museums and isn't going to um
If you're hearing this, it's because you are listening to the free public feed of Heavy Board. To get complete, uncensored, uninterrupted, full access to this podcast, become a subscriber at patreon.com/heavyboard. That's right, Heavy Board is made possible by subscribers like you. For less than 1 cup of coffee per month, you will receive private access to uncensored, full-length episodes, Jerk Shop, heavy bonus content, subscribers-only AMA episodes, bonus extended interviews, and more. Come join the conversation today at patreon.com/heavyboard.
go on trips.
Yeah.
um
That, I mean,
just
it
wants to lie on the
obviously
sofa.
the relationship dynamic, but then there's also what I appreciated about this was that yes, it is kind of more tender towards the mother, like you said, for the first time so far in the collection. Yeah.
Yeah, sympathetic.
But
Yeah.
I also noticed this, and again, this is just me speculating about things that I'm interested in as they come up, and I'm just thinking about ideas in terms. It's a feminist interpretation of a lot of marriages as well, in terms of particularly for Glick's generation, the generation that came of age post second wave, where we had the big kind of cultural touchstones in the 60s into the 70s here. Um, but the generation, and a lot of that generation looked at their mother's generation who grew up, with only first wave. So they were still very much in what, we would consider kind of this, dead tradition of being homemakers or whatever, of
Yeah.
that wasting their potential in a way. And I see it in even older writers, boomer writers that are still around giving interviews about their parents and stuff like that. Writers that are in their 60s and 70s now, 80s, finishing up and giving reflections like that. There's just this, you know, oh, they missed out on something, but it's also like, what other choice did a woman like that have except to embrace, the life that she was living, and the kind of admission here that she thought she would be free, that it was a weight around her ankles, lead strapped to her ankles, and then all of a sudden she's free from it. But also she isn't. She, that
Yeah.
that that that
Yeah.
that she's still, it's not quite what she thought it would be. Started
Yeah.
this talking about second marriages and those usually ending in divorce, right? Because it's not quite what you thought it would be, right? Like there's always something that it just, I don't know. And I think that's a subtle dynamic that's, you again baked into the cake. It's hard to take it out of the batter once you break the egg
Mhm.
into it, so it's kind of
Yeah.
always there with a certain generation of
But
writers.
I was wondering whether with this, this newfound candor and pragmatic laying out of people's behavior, I was just wondering, has she forgotten the poetry? Because I wanted to ask you about this. So,
Yeah.
with children coming home from school,
Yeah.
page 223, and I don't know what you marked down in that, but I don't know, it occurred to me reading that poem, I was thinking, is this a poem?
Yeah, and there's two versions, right?
Yeah, well,
Well, at least two
there,
poems that have the same title.
yeah,
Yeah.
two poems, the same title. The second one is more about the three of them, mother and two daughters, whereas this is sort of going to school and again Glick being a little isolated from the unit. But this is, I don't know, it's just full of facts, isn't it?
This is the danger of confession turning into towards confessional that and I say danger is, just not actually dangerous. Just, you're not going to get the best work out of it is what I mean by danger.
Hmm.
Just you get too wrapped up in just confessing things instead of saying
Hmm.
something with it, right? And I think that there's a couple poems in this that fall victim to that. And like we talked about with life studies in the beginning, even in a book like that, there's some stuff that just feels like he's just reading an encyclopedia to you, about his great great grandfather, the admiral, this kind of like it's just like a Wikipedia. It's like, article or something giving you the facts. And you kind of lose what the poetic, there's a lot of poetic license. You can do whatever you want, of course. I'm never going to tell somebody they can't try something or do something, but it is, there's a reason that we still go to received forms, that we still go to structure, that we still go to these things because it does help us get those ideas across. But I think you're right. I think this is a good example of that kind of forgetting, as you said, the poetics or the poetry of
Yeah,
it,
a
the
little bit.
craft of
Yeah,
it a little bit, and
yeah,
overemphasizing the kind of confession aspect to it, which I think is, my big thing. Damon knows this, regular listeners know this, is the problem with most contemporary poetry is overemphasizing the confessional and not the
yeah.
craft angle of it.
But you can see that she's deep into this project by now, isn't she? She's
Yeah.
like, this is like, it's like two-thirds of the way into the collection, and she's on a mission now, isn't she? She's digging up these episodes, isn't she, from her early life, and
And
it's sort of like taking over everything, isn't it?
yeah, and this is like it was right around this point, like 219, or right after New World, where I started turning the page and going, I was like, didn't we already read this poem? Like I just started saying to myself, like, didn't we already read this one? Like kind of it has the same thing that
Yeah,
was said in a previous poem a few pages before.
yeah,
And whatever, it's writing is difficult, so you're going to be repeating yourself. I'm working on something now where I know I'm repeating myself, and I'm going to have to go back and change it
yeah,
up a little. But for the first draft, why not? Who cares? Go for it. Let's just, sometimes you have to, and maybe that becomes a theme as you go through and edit here. But
yeah.
yeah, I agree with you.
She
And then
just
the sudden shift,
she just slightly dips down, doesn't she? It's sort
yeah,
of it just sounds a bit flat, but um maybe it's
and the
just
shift to her son and stuff in this.
yeah. Yeah, so this is her the second poem to her son, and I don't think she writes very many. I think it's just three, but yeah, these two together, Brown Circle, which is such a powerful poem, it's probably the standout poem in the collection, I suppose, would be Brown Circle. I really it's got so much going on. I mean, I'm not going to talk about it, but that
That last stanza, the word forgive, Damon.
yeah, it's there, isn't it?
I
I must
must
learn to
learn to
forgive my
forgive.
mother. Now I'm helpless. Yeah, she doesn't say she's forgiving though. She just says I must learn. But that the sun burns a brown circle of grass around the flower. To me, that's about open and white space and the
Oh
white
yeah.
daisy and how she admires. I mean, Proofs and Theories, I think I read it out, where she writes, George Oppen is a master of white space, of restraint, juxtaposition, nuance. Um, and I think she's talking about the poetry that lies behind the poetry there. Um, and that's all. quite intellectual, and it's sort of bound up in process.
I always feel
But
like that's a coming of age as well, right? Learning to forgive your
mm,
parents. There's
mm,
that when you're young, you blame them for the mistakes and things, but then as you get older, and then maybe when you have children of your own and you're doing the same things, you learn to see it in a way. When she had a son,
well,
and I
we're
have
all
to
different.
learn, right? Well,
We
that's
all
yeah, that
we,
too,
we
yeah.
all come we all come to that in our own way, don't we?
Right. Yeah.
And,
Where you learn
uh,
to forgive
yeah. And can
because
you?
right.
Can
And
you?
what else is there, right? I mean, and how much energy does it take to hold that grudge too? Whereas I've been really into Neville Goddard recently, and I'm going to do an episode on one of his books. I'm going to ask some friends who would be into it's a little woo-woo. It's a little he does these wild interpretations of the scriptures. Some Christians would say it's blasphemous because he says that the scriptures are meant to make us our own gods, right? When they're talking about God, made in God's image, they're talking about us being gods.
Mm,
Very, very interesting. And he talks about how like that in fact like how that changes your state of mind in order to feel more powerful or to feel more whole or even he would argue even more one with your beliefs or something,
yeah.
interesting stuff. But I'm just, yeah, something like that where how you think about it affects the way the outcome happens, or the kind of thing where if you think everything that's going to happen to you is like negative, right? It's like, oh, I never get I always get screwed over. Well, then you're always going to be screwed over, right? It's kind of this little state of things that you can slightly change if you put in the effort in this kind of way where if you think everything positive is going to happen, well, then you're just going to start to interpret those negative things in a more positive light. And it really kind of, and of course, he was doing this in the 40s and 50s when psychology was coming out with studies. So he would use scripture, he would use psychological studies, and he'd try to, say these things are the one and the same. Uh,
But you
it's very
don't,
interesting, very interesting. Yeah, but
yeah, but you don't have to, you know, forgiveness is not the only option. I
no,
mean, you're talking earlier about how men write about a family, um, childhood, and one of my favorite poets, as I mentioned before, is Franz Wright. And this is a poem of his called Baptism, and it's from his Pulitzer Prize winning collection, Walking to Martha's Vineyard.
right.
I really recommend this collection, Andrew. I mean, it's it's quite a counterpoint to Glick, actually. It's called Baptism. He's talking about his father. Okay. That insane arsehole is dead. I I drowned him and he's not coming back. Look, he has a new life, a new name, now which no one knows except the one who gave it. And then it sort of goes on, but that's such a stunning opening to a poem, isn't it?
Yeah,
That's his father walked out on him when he was, very young. And that's been a problem for him his whole life. And he has a different way of dealing with it. And here's another one he wrote called Abandoned Letter. And he's talking about himself. It starts, Dear child, old child, and he's talking about himself as a child because the child was old because, it had to deal with yet adult problems. Child had to deal, he was given this sort of set of adult problems that the child had to deal with, and that made the child old.
right.
So, dear child, old child, how I miss you, how I wish you well. Beautiful boy, reading to yourself because his parents weren't reading to him. Your big Iliad, your Green Lantern, all the books on dinosaurs and stars, the atom, glad and learned child with the strange name, France. Too sick for your lost friends to cry every minute of your hidden, devoted, and resourceful waking day. How I wish you were mine. So he's like saying, how he wished he could have been his parent. How I wish you were mine. You would never have to be lonely. Those insane so-called parents of ours, don't worry, I would take care of them. It's a beautiful poem, and it's just another way of dealing with this
Yeah.
kind of stuff. You don't have to forgive. You can just say, you know, I've got that insane arsehole out of my life. He's not coming back.
Yeah,
That's another way of dealing with it.
I think even I had a mentor who had a great tragedy happen to her. She would often say this, where she would say, well, people are, oh, well, getting over grief. And she would just say that, like, there's no getting over the grief. Like,
No,
to
no,
be
yeah,
expected to get over it is the problem. Like, it is
yeah,
going to be with me forever. Kind of just this little bit of something that, how do you get over something that you don't, right? You carry it
no,
with you and that's just a part of it now. It is this insane, I mean, even, just to think of how tragic that is, but also just
yeah,
there is no, yeah, I mean, how, oh, you should forgive. And I guess for most people, doing the basic religious interpretation of forgiveness would be maybe helpful, right? Maybe would help you get over something, but that isn't always the way that you get over something here, and maybe it doesn't even require forgiveness or getting over grief, right? It just requires being able
mm,
to, again, we use that cope with it, right? To be
coping.
able to
Yeah,
live despite it or in spite of it, right?
yeah, yeah,
That
yeah,
there's again, I don't want to keep talking about Peterson, but as Peterson, the Nietzsche thing, right? Life is suffering, right?
yeah. Well,
And yeah,
that's what my father famously always used to say.
yeah.
And I rebelled against that.
Well, that
I don't,
generation, that
yeah.
generation suffered a lot. Yeah.
I just,
So yeah, that,
I just rebelled about that,
right,
against that. Poetry is full of, you know, um, life and love and
right,
things that delight us. And it doesn't, you know, Blick, yes, she talks about pain and she talks about suffering all the time. Um, but little things, you know, peep up, and it's not all about that. It isn't, life doesn't have to be all about that. I really don't think it does.
right.
Although I do think we live on the sort of edge of this sort of fracture, which is why we keep on going back to these things. But,
Yeah.
I think to me,
Especially when you read that old
yeah,
romantic stuff we always talk about, it's so
yeah,
positive. It's so happy.
yeah,
It's so grateful. Like, like,
yeah,
and then, you could read 20th century stuff that starts to take kind of a darker turn into some of this. Yeah.
sure does. It's like it's almost like, yeah, we've taken the wrong road. Robert Frost's wrong road. We've gone the right, we've done, he went one way, we went the other, and that has made all the difference because, we're all locked into these sort of darker sort of parts of the human psyche now, and I don't know. It is a it's a difficult forest to get through.
That's for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So,
so it's a choice to put it into a poem. Yeah.
yeah,
It's my son accuses me of his unhappiness.
yeah. So now we're sliding down towards the end of the collection, but I mean that, and now what we're getting is we're getting more poems that sort of reinforce the the sort of the imagery, the symbolism, and the stories of the poems that have gone before. I mean, it's quite like this poem Paradise. Um, so again, it's reestablishing. This is the first poem, the only poem I think, where um, Glick claims the title of firstborn for herself, which of course makes sense of her first collection.
Right.
So I mean, this could have been the first poem of firstborn, couldn't it? Because it's very clear. There it is. I was the firstborn. Believe me, you never heal. You never forget the ache in your side, the place where something was taken away to make another person. So she's saying, oh, okay, all is clear now. You are the firstborn. Except then as you go into the other collection, you realize that's not quite the whole story. But anyway, um, and they're living in this ark. We grew up in a village. People came from the city wanting something simple, something better for the children, clean air, nearby a little stable. All the streets named after the sweethearts or girl children. So a little stable, I think the ark would have had stables in it, wouldn't it?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm beginning to think that's where her horses are kept in the stable in the Ark. Um, and then, a little bit about her father. They're the emotional ones, my sister and my mother. More and more, my sister comes from the city, weeds, tidies the garden. My mother lets her take over. She's the one who cares, the one who does the work. To her, it looks like the country. So her sister lives in the city, and she she likes coming out to the country. Whereas for Glick, it's the grey house. Our house was grey, the sort of place you buy to raise a family. My mother's still there, all alone. And when she's lonely, she watches the television. So they have completely different conceptions of the same thing. This is the family home, but Therese regards it as a completely different place than Louise.
And that last stanza is doing a lot of work uh to tie it back into the Adam story with all of
Yeah,
that. Yeah. And it's so well. I mean, that last stanza is incredibly powerful.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. Well, it's great because she's saying it, isn't she?
yeah.
You know, she's wanted she hasn't wanted to say it. She wants, when you're younger, when you're in your 20s or whatever, you want people to understand you, don't you, without you actually having to explain everything.
Right.
You know,
Yes.
you want your friends to just get it, you know. I mean, and so many American dramas are about this,
Oh,
where
yes.
we're all sort of, yeah, we understand you, we're bros, we get it. And you don't have to go into these long explanations about things. You just hope that people understand you. This is what life is, as an adult. You don't have to go through the whole torturous business of telling everybody exactly, your entire history
Right.
because understand you because you're a different generation, right? But and that's what Glick was hoping for in the firstborn, saying that all these complex fragments and little shards of pain and you don't know where they're coming from. I'm not telling you, but you're going to get it anyway because I'm a poet and this is a poetry reading, and you're all here to listen to poetry, and I'm here to read poetry to you, and we're all part of it, but we're not. We do
Right.
need things explained, really, I think. Otherwise, we leave the poetry reading and we think, well, what on earth was that about? Didn't really understand it at all.
Yeah.
So, you do need that level of explanation. Here she is being clear about about, you know, her role and the influence of childhood upon her as an adult. And she's being plain about it. And and she's accepted. But and there's a certain relief in just writing it down. I know, like Adam, I was the firstborn. Believe me, you never heal. You never forget the ache in your side. There we are. I've just told everybody. You know,
Yeah.
there you are. You know. So I think that the remaining part, they do have that. They are going back, but they're adding little bits of detail. I mean, Child Crying Out. That's a very important poem that ends. Um, the soul is silent. If it speaks at all, it speaks in dreams. So she's, she's saying there that she uses the dream world as a way of entering the world of the soul. And we've seen her do that in previous poems, but she hasn't actually clearly said so. And here she's saying that very, very clearly. Um, Snow. So obviously this whole snow thing that she's got, there's a very strong childhood memory about that, and she's included that in this collection. And of course, Snow keeps on coming back and back and back and back in her poetry and in her earlier poetry and her later poetry. And the this is where it comes from. This really strong childhood memory of being of going to New York, something exciting, and there's just snow everywhere. And for her, that's a sort of that's a standout, like you were saying about the Christian brother who started
Yep.
crying in the middle of the yeah, that's obviously a clear image of her. Just her and her father. Therese isn't there. You know, she's got her father all to herself. They're there in New York. Suddenly the snow comes down. And what does it teach her? It teaches her about, well, she says, I was learning to absorb its emptiness. I remember staring straight ahead into the world my father saw. I was learning to absorb its emptiness. Yeah. My father liked to stand like this to hold me so he couldn't see me. So he was probably holding her up from the pavement to protect her from the driving snow that was coming back down. And yeah, it's obviously a very puzzling memory to her, I think, but very important.
Yeah. Being on your shoulders at the circus, all of that. Yeah.
So before we get to what Celestial Music, was there any other one that you wanted to talk about?
I think we don't have to read the whole thing because it's long because I think terminal resemblance is one that's important.
When I saw my father for the last time, we both did the same thing. Hmm.
Uh
What are you thinking about that one?
well, in terms of I mean it's pretty straightforward as I mean most of the poems in this with clearly it's about the I don't know the cancer whatever it was that killed her father that like he knew about was diagnosed and then him telling her and what the poem focuses on is that she is the most like her father out of all the children.
Hmm.
You know,
Or sort of slightly frozen.
yeah,
What
and
do you
it, you
mean?
know, the way it ends
Motion.
is, you know,
Yeah.
we said goodbye in the usual way, no embrace, nothing dramatic. When the taxi came, my parents watched from the front door, arm in arm, my mother blowing kisses as she always does, because it frightens her when a hand isn't being used. But for a change, my father didn't just stand there. This time, he waved. That's what I did at the door to the taxi. Like him, waved to disguise my hands trembling.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think
It's
it's
a
about there's mention of the changing neighborhood, right? Like all of that that like she grew up in, it's different now. And then all the compare my father and I avoided being alone. Uh, we didn't know how to connect to make small talk. Uh,
yeah. It's just extraordinary, isn't it? What goes on just under the surface. You know, to somebody who knows uh a family member really, really well. You know, they can just make a tiny little gesture, can't they?
and
And you know, it speaks. You know, it's just so much history in that just that tiny little gesture.
that, and I don't, I mean, it must have been the case because almost every writer that had parents of that generation, I guess this would have been the silence or even before the silence here, there was this starving, they all act like they were starved for affection from their father,
Yeah,
especially.
that's because they were, Andrew.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, I don't know if it was because they actually were or because it was like
No,
a
they
projected thing back
no, no,
into,
they definitely were.
yeah,
They definitely were.
there's I mean, yeah, so there's always this kind of, and then, I think about it where I'm just like, is it because they weren't, or are they only starved for it because they're being told they were starved for it later, right? Like when the psychology thing was happening, at this time, being like, oh, your problem is your father didn't hug you enough or something, right? Like this was
Mm.
becoming the kind of, modern day psychology when you'd go to a therapist, blah, 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 oh. And it's like, I'm doing the Modern Family series. There's a lot of jokes from particularly Jay, the boomer character in that is talking about his father, who would have been of the even older generation. And he said the most my father ever did was he kissed me on the back of my head, and he thought he was because he thought he was my sister. Thought I was my sister. He said,
Yeah,
"Good
that's
night,
right. I mean,
Becky."
one
Like
day,
that's what he
yeah.
said,
I mean,
and then like yeah, yeah.
one
So
day, one day, if ever human beings become more enlightened, we'll really understand this stuff a lot more. But if children have uh, an insatiable need for love and demonstrable, and love being demonstrated within the family by their parents, and it's limitless, it seems to me. But what we don't understand is when the period is that it's sort of like so crucial and critical, and if you miss that period, then you're in trouble, and the child's in trouble. Your relationship with the child is in trouble because they didn't have they didn't have that sort of reinforcement of love at the right time. And that's the bit that's missing. We don't know when the right time is. I mean, you could say, well, children should always have
right,
that sort of that love, but it's so crucial in the early years, and if you don't have it, you don't have it. But it's like, do you know the Corrections by Jonathan Franzen, the
oh
beginning of that book?
yes,
It's got a fantastic start, hasn't it? Where he's watching his parents walk through the airport, isn't he? And he says, yeah, I think he writes, he says, to anybody else, they look like a sort of harmless, old retired couple walking through the airport, but to him, they were killers. Do you remember
yeah,
that? I thought that was just so accurate. You know, you know, you know, the tiniest little gesture that somebody who you know really, really well as a family member, you know so much about that just from that one little gesture that anybody else, you know, doesn't mean a thing.
right,
And she's yeah, she's brought, she's that's what she's talking about in this poem. It's so beautifully done. I mean, you don't necessarily want to know that
yeah,
about people because it's a waste, is it? It's sort of like, do we have to talk about people in that way because it's bursting, it's taking the air out of the balloon. It's like it destroys so much if you're looking at things in that analytical way. But that is her, that's the only way she can look at it. And that's the story of this poem.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And how her father probably felt the same, but didn't demonstrate it, and didn't talk about it, and she felt deprived.
I think all of that,
Yeah.
and everybody says that kind of that generation too, like the generations that fought in the Great Wars, right? The
Mm.
of the
Yeah.
there's always that I don't know, there's this, to be sympathetic to the men that didn't show affection, I guess in that way. I'm always thinking like just I don't know if somebody asked them about something and you'd be like, "Oh, grandpa, why are you crying or something?"
Yeah. Yeah.
How is he going to explain to his little granddaughter, I'm crying because these men died for me, like, and I watched it happen, and I feel guilty that like I didn't live a proper life or something.
But they could
I don't
also
know.
be
I mean, that's an
but
extreme example, that's
but
an
but
extreme example, but
but they could also be crying because they came back and they were still young men. They
right,
came back and they tried to talk to their father about it,
right,
and their fathers didn't want to talk about it.
right.
No, no, we don't talk about that now. That was the war. You've got other things to think about now. No, I
I
want to talk.
mean,
Yeah, I want to
friends,
talk about this. And you went through something like this, didn't you? When you went through something like this, didn't you? Didn't you? Or
right,
grandfather went through something. Talk to me about that. No, we're not going to talk about
yeah. And I knew
that.
this is when
Yeah.
I was in elementary school. I had friends who my grandfather wasn't old enough to be in World War II. He was in the Korean War, but I had friends whose grandfathers were in the World War II, and they would, if you even brought it up, they'd start crying. So there was this
Yeah.
kind of, yeah, I mean, maybe just the limits of human, emotion in some way. They
I
don't
don't know.
even
It's
know
just this. It's
how do you
just
process that, right? How do you live
it's
with
it's
that grief? Yeah, how do you
it's
live with that?
just it's just the emotional makeup of men, which is pretty hopeless. And I mean, I think that in my view anyway, and I think at the end of terminal resemblance, it's pretty hopeless because of this sort of failure at the father and son level. And I think, often there's the mother and the daughter failure, which is what Glick is, so central, such a recurring theme in this collection. And I think at the end of this terminal resemblance, terminal resemblance, that's, it says
Right.
it in the title, doesn't it?
Yeah.
She's abandoning her father, so she's sort of, she's gone through this great effort of turning her father into Achilles, out of probably a sense of, well, I've got to do something here in order to give him some shape in my poetry. And then in this collection, she's saying, I just can't be bothered. He's not going to be Achilles anymore. I'm not going to tell anybody that he's not Achilles anymore, but I'm just going to abandon him. I'm going to sort of like just not try anymore. That's what it feels like me. To me, the poems about her father, they almost sound like she's just not going to try anymore.
What
That's what it
I
feels like.
what I took from it was, and the thing that I registered with me with it with terminal resemblance was she's really talking about herself, right? Because she's her father's daughter, right? And then like, oh,
Mm,
we would do the same things and all of
mm.
that. And she kind of understands him in a way that maybe her mother and sister didn't. And that, that's her burden is that she's just like him in this way, terminal resemblance in terms of it's going to be rough that you resemble him so much, or you're going to. Uh,
But she says it here, Andrew. She says, my father and I avoided being alone. We didn't know how to connect, to make small talk. There didn't seem to be any other possibilities. So this was special. When a man's dying, he has a subject. I mean, I remember going out to a sort of local restaurant in France with my father, and you know, I'd said to him, look, we really need to talk about this. Why don't we go out to this restaurant and talk about it? And very, very reluctantly, he agreed to do that. And we got to the restaurant and I said, okay, can we start talking about this now? He just wouldn't talk about it. He just would not talk about it. We went through, we had a kind of light cafe type meal. And then he started to get angry, sort of about halfway through the meal, and so he went into one of his sort of big things, one of his big sources of resentment. And the reason he was being angry was because I got him out there to try and force him to talk about something. He didn't want to talk about it. And
right.
that's what Glick's saying here. My father and I avoided being alone. We didn't know how to connect, to make small talk. There didn't seem to be any other possibilities. She's saying, we even went to the effort, Dad, of turning you into Achilles. And what did I get for that? I just don't feel that. I mean, there might be further poems that we haven't looked at yet, Andrew, which, cast the father into a more positive light, and maybe he can be a bit more Achilles-like again. But, I'm not seeing it right now.
It's always interesting. Yeah. I mean, obviously I don't know the age of, I mean, the only comparison I have is my grandfather with his, who was very affectionate, very involved, kind of,
Yeah,
always
that's
getting
so
on the floor
nice.
and playing
Yeah,
and stuff. And even when he
yeah,
had a heart condition and stuff, like, would still be
yeah.
doing that with his grandkids. And according to my mother, he did that, in her childhood as well. So, I mean, I mean, is it just I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I have no idea. Maybe that's why I'm so some would say naive and romantic about about the world in a way.
Well, I'm
Uh
naive and romantic, and I mean,
yeah, you have to be
I
to be
think
a
that's
poet.
just,
Yeah.
I think that's like being born with the Torah inside you. I think I just got that inside me, and nobody came around and slapped me like the way they do in,
Right.
Jewish families. They didn't get the rabbi in to slap the newborn and slap
This
the
is
Torah out of them.
saved by the Reformation of of thousands of years of pre-war born. No.
So
Uh
let's go to Celestial Music, which
yes, yes,
is
that's a
the
good idea.
penultimate poem.
Yes.
And and unless you want to talk about any others, and to me, this is a really nice captured still moment from childhood. Do you want to tackle it or tackle some of it?
Sure. Yeah. Uh, Celestial music. I have a friend who still believes in heaven. Not a stupid person, yet with all she knows, she literally talks to God. She thinks someone listens in heaven. On earth, she's unusually competent, brave too, able to face unpleasantness. We found a caterpillar dying in the dirt, greedy ants crawling over it. I'm always moved by weakness, by disaster, always eager to oppose vitality, but timid also, quick to shut my eyes. Whereas my friend was able to watch, to let events play out, according to nature. For my sake, she intervened, brushing a few ants off the torn thing and set it down across the road. My friend says I shut my eyes to God, that nothing else explains my aversion to reality. She says I'm like the child who buries her head in the pillow so as not to see, the child who tells herself that light causes sadness. My friend is like the mother, patient, urging me to wake up an adult like herself, a courageous person. In my dreams, my friend reproaches me. We're walking on the same road, except it's winter now. She's telling me that when you love the world, you hear celestial music. Look up, she says. When I look up, nothing. Only clouds, snow, a white business in the trees, like birds, like brides leaping to a great height. Then I'm afraid of her. I see her, caught in a net deliberately cast over the earth. In reality, we sit by the side of the road, watching the sunset. From time to time, the silence pierced by a bird call. It's this moment we're both trying to explain. The fact that we're at ease with death, with solitude. My friend draws a circle in the dirt. Inside, the caterpillar doesn't move. She's always trying to make something whole, something beautiful, an image capable of life apart from her. We're very quiet. It's peaceful sitting here, not speaking, the composition fixed, the road turning suddenly dark, the air going cool, here and there the rocks shining and glittering. It's this stillness that we both love. The love of form is a love of endings.
Yeah, I think that is it's a really complete poem. I really do. I
And
think
it's
it's like,
calling back even to the very first poem in the collection where it says, not inert, still.
yeah,
It's
it's
the
full of
stillness that we both love. Yeah.
it's got a lovely I'll leave that last line off. I mean, I think that if it ended, it's this stillness that we both love. I think that's a better ending than to stick on that last line, the love of form is a love of endings.
Yeah.
Because I just see that that's like not necessary, really. Um, because the whole poem is about this, and she does this in the future. And I think it's one of the things that is one of the most successful things about her poetry is where she can hold a scene, a whole scene. Do you remember that poem you read about when she goes for it with a trip with her mother? She recalls this trip that she went on with her mother and Therese, and a beautiful sunny day. And it was abroad, and they went by there were airplanes overhead, and they were walking through this sort of park, and she can hold this image all the way through the poem, and she doesn't actually have to say, we were the caterpillars, but it's clear that they were the caterpillars. They are the caterpillars in this scene. They're the children.
And the metaphor of
Uh,
a caterpillar,
yeah, in the metaphor of a caterpillar, and she's got a friend who's a bit different from her. She she This is a lovely opening line. I have a friend who still believes in heaven. That's like the opening line to Lover of Flowers. In our family, everyone loves flowers.
right.
Just it kind of encapsulates everything that you need to know about what's going to, what's going to follow, really. And then she's got this friend. She's a bit odd, you know, in my dreams, my friend, we're walking down the same road, and she's telling me that when you love the world, you hear celestial music. I mean, that's kind of what we were just talking about, this sort of innate, naivety and romanticism. You know, she's walking down the road. Glick looks up. She sees clouds, snow, and a white business in the trees, like brides leaping to a great height. That's what Glick sees. But she's got this sort of slightly weird friend who hears celestial music when they're walking down the road. And that's just a lovely portrait, isn't it? It's a lovely mise en scene, I suppose it's called, isn't it? A scene within a scene where you're just out with your friend, and I mean Emily Dickinson does this
Yes.
in a
And
lot, doesn't she? Where she
Glick loves Dickinson. We talked. Yeah, there's a few
yeah
direct references in some of the previous episodes. Go listen to those,
yeah
listeners. Yeah.
There's a lovely, I think the first poem she ever wrote was called Valentine's Day, wasn't it? Emily Dickinson, and it's just beautiful. It's so accomplished, and it's about her sitting. It gets more and more strange as because the poem goes on, and then in the end of the poem, there's like six of them or five of them lined up on a branch of sort of available young women, all sitting on a branch, looking at the men who are walking underneath and sort of weighing them up.
Right.
And Emily Dickinson is one of them, and she's 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 brilliant at introducing sort of companions into her poems, isn't she? And here's Glick doing the same thing, and it's obviously a valuable friendship, and it's a rewarding friendship. They're different, but she's not sort of saying, there's a separation between us. It's just we're a little bit different, in this stillness that we both love. She was always trying to make something whole, something beautiful, an image capable of life apart from her. So in the end, she taught, and this is the penultimate poem in the collection. In the end, she taught Glick something, perhaps,
Right.
which is that because I was not loved, it meant I could love. Maybe she saw that in her friend, who was always trying to make something whole, something beautiful, an image capable of life apart from her.
Yeah. I said I want to pull up that Plato quote now. It
So,
starts the whole
and
collection.
so, Andrew, do you feel a little bit differently about Ararat now?
Uh, I do like it a little bit more after we talked about it, going through this, which is always the case. Uh,
Yeah,
but it is compared to the other books, I was not crazy about it.
yeah,
I think there are some great standouts here, which we covered, but then, like I said, I think there's also a lot of redundancy. And, what I always love about Glick is how precise and tight everything is. And this is
yeah,
the one collection that isn't, and she kind of lets herself sprawl around and sit in it a
yeah.
minute and all of that. Maybe that's just my personality where I'd prefer the tightness.
Well, maybe you don't have to read it again. It just, I mean, it is an acquired, I mean, the whole of Glick is an acquired taste, isn't it? I mean, I'm not even sure I've acquired that taste. I mean, it's trying to trying to figure out what she's talking about and how she feels about things and how she turns that into poetry. That's, you know, there's a certain fascination to that. And the fact that she's, as I said at the beginning, this is all pretty mainstream now, but she arrived in the 20th century and she was doing this in the 20th century and
Right.
she was introducing this genre. And I think you just got to put yourself back in that space, say, okay, we're really, really used to this now.
Right.
But there was a time when it wasn't part of poetry. And
Right.
she says about herself in her great poem October, she says, I can bring candor, at least I can bring candor. But I don't know. I think that's a misreading of her. That's a misreading, I think, of what she does, because I don't think she's very truthful about things often. She says she isn't in this collection,
Right.
but I do think that she is talking about the psychological basis of a lot of why people want to write poems and read them out, and why people feel poetry is important, and to bring it down to that sort of more sort of almost a mundane level,
Yeah.
perhaps, but something that's had a lot of, her approach has had a great deal of significance.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, she's really built a whole world of Glick, hasn't she?
Yeah, that's for sure. Uh,
Mm. But we can leave the critics to talk about that, can't we, Andrew?
yeah, sometimes they struggle with it though,
They love it.
as we've gone into here, sometimes the
Yeah,
critics.
historicize, we can leave the critics to historicize.
And I did find myself, as you mentioned, I could feel myself being bored with it because of how prevalent that stuff is now in contemporary
Mm.
poetry. And I
Yeah, yeah,
started trying to tell myself, okay, recognize the context here. And, it's hard to do, but easier to say to yourself than it is to actually implement. But, you try as somebody who's trying to do this in good faith and, for
yeah,
love of the craft and all of that. But
yeah.
so yeah, I
There,
definitely
yeah.
appreciate that. Yeah, I definitely
I mean,
appreciate both.
the two penultimate poem and the final poem, nothing about death in that, which is
Yeah,
really nice.
yeah.
And there's
Almost
not,
about rebirth. Almost,
yeah,
the caterpillar metaphor,
yeah,
the
mm,
the self-recognition in the kind of I thought pain was one thing, but really it meant that I loved these
mm,
things that I lost.
mm,
That's what it really means. Uh, I have a problem with a lot of the Gen X writers too, that well, really just a few of them that talk about how writing is pain, blah blah blah. And I'm like, okay, well,
yeah.
I don't know how painful their life was, especially compared to
Have
the
you read
boomers and the
have you read Glick? Yeah.
yeah,
That,
Glick or
yeah.
even the older generation. Yeah. And then it's always the same kind of the pain of Gen Xers was that daddy didn't love them, yeah, as much as they wanted him to or something. But
Yeah.
that's a whole other.
So I guess our next collection then is, because you've done the Wild Iris, our next collection is Meadowlands, I guess, isn't it?
We can do Meadowlands. We can even hit the Wild Iris if you want, Damon. We can do
Do you want to do that?
a retrospective, yeah, just to do the complete as almost a companion. You know what I should
Yeah.
do is I should read this and make my notes, reread it and make my notes for us to talk about it. And then I'm going to
Okay.
go back and listen to what I said 3 years
Yeah.
ago or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
And then I'm
Yeah.
going to
Yeah.
see if anything changed. And maybe we'll go into some of the
Okay.
differences too. That could be fun, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Sure.
Just
Sure.
in three
Okay. Well,
years, how your
yeah, we
opinion can
could.
change. Yeah.
Yeah, we could take that approach. I could go back and make some notes about your first, your responses to it, and yeah, we could build on that. I mean, it is a seminal collection, so I mean, I don't mind doing
I
a pod on
remember
that
it
if you want.
as being flawless. That's what I
Yeah,
remember it as. Yeah, so we'll see if I feel that way this time. I probably will. It's
yeah.
quite a masterpiece
Okay, okay.
towards
So,
that. Yeah, so we'll see.
so the Wild Hour is next then.
Yeah, I'm fine with it. Yeah.
Redo, as John Updike would say, I guess. Is it redo or is that how you pronounce it in Americanese? Redo?
The Americans would be like redux.
Oh, Redux.
Ducks. Yeah,
Okay,
they would
Redux.
pronounce the X and yeah.
Okay. Okay, so
But
Wild Iris Redux.
yes, but we can do it the proper French pronunciation.
Uh, okay. Well, I'll see you then.
Yeah, as always, appreciate it, Damon. It's been a lot of
Okay.
fun.
Okay, great. Okay. Bye for now, Andrew.
Heavy.
bored,
Heavy.
I am heavy, heavy, heavy.
bored,
I may say that the male is entirely hostile. No!
Resources.
Life, friends, is boring. We must not say
a lack of gratitude for life. Bored. I aspire to boredom, I should say.
Bored. Heavy.
I am heavy.
Bored.
Has you the night sweats and the day sweats, pal? Pal, I do.
If you're hearing this, it's because you are listening to the free public feed of Heavy Bored. To get complete, uncensored, uninterrupted, full access to this podcast, become a subscriber at patreon.com/heavybored. That's right, Heavy Bored is made possible by subscribers like you. For less than 1 cup of coffee per month, you will receive private access to uncensored, full-length episodes, Jerk Shop, heavy bonus content, subscribers-only AMA episodes, bonus extended interviews, and more. Come join the conversation today at patreon.com/heavybored.